Chapter 14. Tally Wiki slowed the van and turned right onto a narrow 2-lane road, signaling the trip to Pandora was coming to an end shortly. The sun had set about 20 minutes before, not that she could see it through the red cloud cover. The visibility was poor. The rain had continued in a steady drizzle and hadn't changed its intensity the entire time she'd been driving. Unusual, Tally thought. Not only was the storm bleeding red, it never seemed to change its flow. Rain got hard, rain got soft. There were always variations across any storm, especially when driving a vehicle and covering ground, but not with this rain. How can the flow remain the same no matter what? Plus, she knew there was always a beginning and an end to any storm. She was starting to wonder if the latter would ever be true. There was no sign of the weather easing in any direction. In fact, G had reported the storms were increasing in size, moving across the country like a scourge from heaven. She didn't like it, not one bit. Something was controlling this stuff, probably a someone. Someone with an agenda and a purpose, she decided, worrying about what came next. A memory flooded her thoughts, showing her a vision of a massive wooden boat and a bearded, religious man standing in front of it, wearing an ancient robe and holding a staff. Her mind shifted to the man's face, Noah's face, and the fateful warning he'd received from God. Sure, it was only a fable from the Bible, but she'd gladly build an ark to protect her people if it came to that. Tally brushed the memory aside, wanting to focus on getting the van to Pandora in one piece. The pavement was covered with red, making it increasingly difficult to control the vehicle as her tires hydroplaned across the wet surface. "Almost home," she told Simon, who was sitting in the passenger seat next to her. Simon winced, leaning closer to her. "And not a minute too soon, because my back is starting to get stiff." "Only another 10 minutes or so. The dirt road turnoff is just a couple miles ahead." "If you don't mind, could I ask you something?" "Sure, Simon, you can ask me anything." "Why'd your grandparents choose Amish country? Sounds like they had plenty of money and could have settled anywhere." "That's easy. The Amish make the best neighbors. They're quiet, keep to themselves, and don't ask questions. Plus, you never have to worry about them trespassing on your land or trying to steal your stuff." "Makes sense," Simon said, nodding slowly like he was chewing through her answer. "Besides, if the grid ever fails, they're not going to be affected. They're already self-reliant and living old school. There's something to be said about having neighbors with skills." "Very true. Your grandparents obviously thought this through." "Oh yeah, none of this was by accident." She leaned forward and squinted, looking through the windshield. "What's that?" she asked Simon, slowing the transport out of caution. "What's what?" She pointed a finger ahead, hoping to focus his attention. "That!" Simon leaned forward, like Tally, peering through the windshield. "Roadblock," he reported. "G, call Dre," she ordered. "Sure thing, Wicks," G answered from the back. "What for?" "Give him our position and ask if anything unusual is happening there." "Will do." Tally focused on the pairs of headlights ahead. They were sitting in such a way as to point their beams across the road at various 45-degree angles. The light illuminated the bare trees on either side of the road, giving them a medieval look under the wash of red covering their bark. All that was missing was a surface-level fog. "Judging by the height of the headlights, I'd say pickup trucks or SUVs," Simon reported. She stopped the van, keeping the drivetrain engaged and her foot on the brake pedal. "Yeah, I agree." Movement appeared in front of the trucks. Dark silhouettes, perhaps 3 or 4 of them, passing through the beams. "I'm going to pull a little closer," Tally informed the group, easing pressure off the brake. The van inched forward, stopping once its headlights reached the roadblock. Simon was right. 2 pickup trucks were parked in the road. 4 persons, men, she assumed, stood in front of them, forming what she assumed was a skirmish line. They wore balaclavas to hide their face and were holding what looked like tactical rifles with scopes. "AR-10s, maybe 15s, Simon said, channeling his tactical experience. "But From the way those men are standing and holding their weapons, I don't think they're military or police. I have a bad feeling about this, Tally said, keeping a sharp watch on the men. What should I do? Simon's voice turned deep and confident. Hold position. We don't know what they want, so let's not start jumping to conclusions. Reacting too soon could escalate the situation, but I'd suggest putting the van in reverse, just in case we need to make a quick retreat. She did as he suggested, holding the brake while shifting the transmission into reverse. Gee, she said over her shoulder, did you get a hold of Dre? Yeah, he says no, nothing strange to report. Red rain happens every day, right? Seriously, G, nothing? He says your brother called on the radio, that's about it. A fifth man got out of the truck on the right and walked in front of the roadblock. He was at least a half a foot taller than the other men and rail thin. The other four spread out and held their rifles high, and so did the tall man, except he formed the letter X with his arms. Gunfire erupted from the others, sending streaks of ammo flashing into the night sky. Oh, shit! Oh, shit is right, Simon said. Hit the gas, now! No, not what I meant. I know who this is, she said, recognizing the arm signal. She'd known it since she was a child, playing and hunting in the woods outside of Pandora. You do? Yes, one of them at least, the super tall one making an X with his arms. G climbed forward, wedging himself between the seats, pressing his left shoulder against Tally's. Stretch? Who? Simon asked. My brother, Wyatt. How can you tell? Simon asked her. The height, the build, the way he moves, and that arm signal, it's something he and I used when we were kids. We made it up and never showed anyone else. I haven't seen it in years. This guy's a total nightmare, G said, looking at Simon while latching onto Tally's shoulder. I can handle him, G. He's my little brother. She opened the door, slid her butt across the seat, and put one foot onto the road. I'm coming with you, Simon said, wincing as he opened the passenger door. No, you should stay here. He's kind of a hothead. If things go wrong, I don't want anything happening to you. Please, Simon, let me deal with this. Not a chance, Simon said through the open cab. You asked for my help, and that's what I'm going to do, starting right now. Fine, she said, pausing. Just follow my lead, okay? We need to be careful not to push his buttons. It's best if I do all the talking. Chapter 15. President Donald Cooper fumed, pacing the nuclear-hardened Situation Room in the sub-basement of the White House with a can of his favorite vitamin water, Brain Flurry, in his hand. I'm getting sick and tired of hearing I don't know from you people, he yelled, slamming the drink container into the oak conference table. Cooper wanted to remain presidential, but his temper boiled. I funded every last one of your projects, and you promised me a weapon. You promised me battlefield advantages and economic control. That's the only reason I went to bat for you with the Appropriations Committee and Congress on multiple occasions, putting my entire administration and my reputation on the line. I threw the weight of this office around and got you your damn money. And what do I get? I get red rain falling from the sky. I get a population on the verge of panic. I get leaders from every corner of the world calling and demanding answers or touting retribution. I get a storm that looks like it's going to continue spreading and wreaking havoc across the nation. Somebody give me answers, and I mean right now. His chief of staff, Amanda Murray, sat to his left. The slender brunette with a full chest and heavy lipstick was the only one actually present in the flesh, aside from the president himself. The rest of the attendees at the emergency session of the National Security Council were represented by three-dimensional holographic projections hosted by Indigo Technologies. Their disembodied heads and chests floated over the table and in front of their respective empty leather chairs. In addition to the regular members of the council, the heads of NASA and the National Weather Service were also online. Army General Nathan Henry Rawlings III, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a reserved, distinguished African-American man with a broad, pitted face and short cropped hair with thin streaks of gray along the sides, spoke first. I have preliminary reports about unusual drone activity in several key areas of the nation, both in and around the epicenter of the storms, sir. I need more than reports, Nate, the president shot back. Yes, Mr. President, Rawlings replied. It seems one of our cloud-seeding drones out of Travis took off on an unscheduled flight earlier this evening. Travis is located— I know where Travis is, General. I grew up in Oakland. I have cousins in Fairfield. Is that all you have? An unscheduled flight? No, sir. Traffic control said the bird was being controlled remotely out of Vandenberg, like all of the other top-secret weather-seeding missions. The initial clearances checked out, but when I called Vandenberg, they couldn't confirm the mission. It wasn't in their logs, and no one on duty knew anything about it. It dropped off the radar just after the storms began. What was it carrying? President Cooper pressed. Payload unknown, sir. It's impossible to say if it had anything to do with the storms at this point, sir. We've sent search teams to look for the wreckage, but so far they haven't found anything. Choppers or fast movers? Initially both. However, after we lost contact with the aircraft, we were forced to dispatch the Coast Guard. What do you mean, lost contact? Flight crews reported complete instrument failure as soon as they entered one of the air masses. Shortly after, their engines quit and communications dropped. What about the men? Search and rescue is on it, sir. No word yet. All we can hope is that they had a chance to eject. The Coast Guard has their chopper teams looking for them now. Wait a minute. I thought you said flying in this shit wasn't possible. It's not. But the storms are only concentrated over land so far, Mr. President, leaving the airspace above our oceans clear. The current search grid is offshore. This whole thing is bizarre, like something out of an Alfred Hitchcock movie. The general nodded. I'm afraid air support will only be possible from land bases which haven't been blanketed by one of the storms. Once they are, we'll be limited to aircraft from our carrier strike groups and other support vessels. Then you better call them all home, General. Already in the works, Mr. President. What about civilian air traffic? We've lost 9 commercial flights within the last hour and several private craft, but the FAA has already rerouted flights around the storms, diverting them to the nearest unaffected airport. The President gasped. How many did we lose? We're still waiting on the passenger lists, but estimates are well over 2,000. Cooper was dumbfounded. Why the hell didn't you lead with this? I'm sorry, sir. I was waiting for more information to become available to better offer our suggestions and formulate an action plan, Rawlings said, second-guessing his decision to wait. However, the FAA was on it immediately, and frankly, sir, there are bigger threats at play. Rawlings, when we start to lose American lives, there is no greater threat. Understand? Yes, sir. Won't happen again. Cooper shook his head, trying to maintain control of his anger and grief. He was usually a polished, composed leader, keeping his emotions in check, but for some reason today, he was all fire and brimstone. His mind was racing in 100 directions at once, making it difficult to remember protocols, procedures, duties, and responsibilities. However, he wasn't concerned. That's what his team was for, and why they were in the positions assigned to them. He knew they'd pull together, so he didn't have to. He just needed to light a fire and get them all focused. Ladies and gentlemen, this stops now. We're not going to lose another civilian on my watch. I want all air traffic grounded across the board until we get a handle on this situation. No exceptions. Am I making myself clear? Everyone nodded and agreed verbally. Cooper paused, then continued with the general. What else? You said reports, as in plural. That's one. What else do you have? Same story out of Cape Canaveral. An unscheduled drone flew up the eastern seaboard. Another storm started in the area, and the bird headed out to sea before dropping off radar. Cooper glared around the room. That can't be coincidence. Anyone else here think that's coincidence? He was answered by a half-dozen semi-audible rumblings of no, sir, and can't be, sir, and of course not, sir. Cooper snorted in disgust. Well, who wants to weigh in next? He directed his scorn at the Director of National Intelligence, Nancy Wiggins, a middle-aged woman with thinning black hair cut in a sharp-angled bob. She wore bright red lipstick and had the pale skin of someone who spent 20 hours a day staring at a computer screen. Care to say anything intelligent about this, Wiggins? She cleared her throat and pushed her eyebrows together. We've just received the report from the Joint Chiefs, Mr. President. I wish we had it earlier, but our analysts are tearing into it now. At first glance, I agree with you. There's no such thing as coincidence in the intelligence world, especially not when events correlate on each data point like this.
Well, at least one person is not afraid to officially weigh in. Recommendations?
Wiggins continued to take the lead. We're already in communication with many of our traditional allies, and we're considering reaching out to a few of our adversaries. I'll need your permission to open a dialogue directly with the SSC and OSAC, however, she said, referring to the Sino-Soviet coalition and the Organization of South American Cartels.
For what purpose?
We anticipate a need for local cooperation in some of the affected population centers where we don't have intelligence assets in place.
What about satellite surveillance?
That's not an option. The storms are causing heavy interference.
With all of them?
Yes, sir. Even ultraviolet and radar. Everything's affected.
How is that possible? I thought the new network was impervious to bad weather.
It is, she said, coughing. Excuse me, it was. We're not sure what's happening. The president shook his head, trying to make sense of the information.
So let me get this straight. We spent well over $90 billion in new upgrades, and now we're blind and susceptible to attack?
Unfortunately, yes. Everywhere except over the oceans.
That's unacceptable!
I agree, but our adversaries are blind too.
That's not going to make me sleep any better tonight, Wiggins.
We're on it, sir. NSA has their top-level techs working to determine the root cause. However, it should be noted some of the civilian internet is acting up too. The failures are random and spotty in nature, but the difficulties are making connections to areas outside of our secure IntelliWeb network unreliable. I'm assuming we're not going to open up our secure network to the public, leaving us with blind spots across the globe. Gathering reliable information from the affected areas will be problematic. As mentioned by General Rawlings, we suspect there may be something in the air mass causing the interference with the satellites and affecting certain areas of the public network. We think it's some type of strong electromagnetic field, but we can't be sure.
Why not?
Launching an instrument pack into a storm cloud won't work. They use computer-based electronics, and after the problems we've seen with our jets and helos, it seems likely they would be disabled immediately upon penetration.
You mean to tell me that all our advanced surveillance and scientific instruments are useless?
That would be my guess, sir.
I don't want guesses, Wiggins. I want answers.
We're on it, sir. However, until our satellite coverage is back online and the civilian network becomes more stable, we'll need to open communications with everyone in the affected areas to gather local information as to the size and nature of this event.
Granted, but how, if satellite coverage is down?
All communications will need to be over land-based copper, or we'll need to use line-of-sight, low-altitude transmissions. Nothing seems capable of penetrating these storms.
Cooper understood. We go old school.
Yes, sir.
Okay, do what you need to do, but I want information from our end kept on a strictly need-to-know basis. The last thing we need is word getting out about our UAVs being involved in this.
Wiggins nodded, but wasn't done. We should also consider creating a grid of floating ocean-based repeaters to allow long-range transmissions, while we still can. We don't know the scope or length of this event, and it would seem wise to get a jump on this while it's still possible. We may need it later.
Excellent idea. Make it so, Nancy. Sir?
Grant Channing, the Secretary of State, spoke up.
We need to address the possibility that this event is going to turn into a lingering global crisis, the likes of which we've never seen or imagined. We could be exposed to more than just a security threat here.
Go on.
I'm no meteorologist, or biologist for that matter, but my gut is telling me that if these storms do indeed continue to spread, then we run the risk of them blocking out the sun. If that happens for a prolonged period, well, sir, let's just say it could affect the world's food supply. But I'd like to hear what the experts have to say. We'll need to bring in the FDA and other agricultural agencies into the loop.
Fine, Grant. Duly noted. I trust your gut,
President Cooper said, turning his eyes to the head of the National Weather Service.
Bob, I'm sorry we had to keep you in the dark about the classified weather projects before tonight. But you're a civilian, understand? Everything has been need to know until now, Perkins.
I understand, Mr. President, and I appreciate your confidence in me today.
To be honest, it's not like we haven't known things were happening in the shadows, especially after we noticed the blanket recruitment of our top minds, after which they'd fall off the radar. It became pretty obvious something was up. Anyway, I'm not here to raise issue with your procurement policies. I'm here to tell you these air masses are like nothing we've seen before. They came out of nowhere, and they're not behaving like any storm we've encountered. I know this will sound crazy, but it's like they have a mind of their own, focusing on a specific agenda.
Explain.
The jet stream, sir. It's not affecting it, the scientist said, looking flustered and embarrassed at not being able to offer any more insight. These storms are breaking every rule known to weather sciences. We're going to have to throw out all the manuals and textbooks after this one. The people at NASA seem to have made an interesting discovery, though. The president raised his eyebrows, looking at the NASA director's holo image.
Really? I'd love to hear it. Gene?
That's correct, Mr. President, answered Gene Rogers, the director of NASA. You've heard that the rain is slightly thicker than normal rain. For lack of a better word, it's syrupy. Thicker than water, and it seems to be slowly coagulating, like some type of biological substance. We've been studying its characteristics.
And?
The president asked. Indeterminate. All we know so far is it contains an unknown biological component, sir, Rogers offered. Something we've never seen or cataloged before.
Are you saying what I think you're saying? Extraterrestrial?
Gene's eyes flew wide and his voice cracked. No, sir. Nothing of the kind. It's an organic substance with DNA-like properties, but it's nothing from beyond our world. It's terrestrial in nature. That much I can assure you, Mr. President.
That's good news, Gene, President Cooper said. Otherwise, I'd have to start to wonder if we're all unwitting characters in some low-budget science fiction movie.
A smattering of laughter was heard from most in attendance.
Is there more, Gene?
Gene nodded. Granted, this substance is something entirely new, but we're still investigating. We've been able to determine there's also a ferrochemical component in the rain, but we're unsure of its exact nature or purpose. I've got our finest minds working on it as we speak. But until we know if it's natural or man-made, it's best if everyone not jump to conclusions.
Has anyone talked to Dr. Cruz at the CDC? The president asked the group. We'll need to rule out some new type of pandemic, though I'm not sure that's the correct term to use here. But Ray needs to be read in.
I'll make the call, Amanda said, taking notes. A moment later, her expression changed to one of concern. Just so everyone knows, I tried to get Dr. Cruz and a few others to join this conference earlier, but couldn't make contact. I'm guessing that everyone is scrambling.
The president knew she was lying about trying to contact the various division heads and directors who should have already been attending this meeting. It was his fault they weren't invited, and she was covering for him. The knot in his stomach was growing, affecting his back and right leg. Cooper pushed through the discomfort and was about to relay more orders to the staff when the lights in the Situation Room flickered, then dimmed. The holograms around the table froze in mid-expression, leaving the president and his chief of staff alone.
What's going on? Amanda?
She didn't answer. At the far end of the conference table, a new hologram appeared. Vito Indigo, wearing his trademark casual Caribbean attire. He flashed his billion-dollar smile and said,
Good evening, Mr. President. Vito, what's going on? You can't just crash a meeting of the NSC. Well, with all due respect, Mr. President, I just did. I warned you about the need to upgrade your security protocols. You should have listened. I could have solved the problem months ago for you. I even gave you killer pricing, but nobody seemed interested. Is that what this is about? I've got my hands full, Indigo, and I don't have time for your crooning today. You need to sign off and restore the holofeeds with my staff, and I mean now! Well, Coop, as usual, you seem to have forgotten a few things. First, my generous contributions to your campaign put you in office. Second, my internet technology makes everything in your world of espionage and deceit, and I mean everything, possible. Without my fully redundant, self-healing private network, you wouldn't be having this meeting. So let's check the attitude, shall we? For the sake of humanity. It's clear you're facing events you can't fathom or control. Listen, Vito, I don't care about any of that now. I have a national crisis on my hands, which is about to turn into a worldwide crisis with everyone pointing their fingers at us. Or didn't you notice?
That's precisely my point, Mr. President. I'm here to offer my services.
Can you stop this?
Indigo laughed. No, Mr. President, I'm afraid that's beyond even my company's abilities. But I have a good idea who started it and how it was done.
You do?
Yes, I do.
Well, out with it, man. I don't have all day.
Certainly, but there's one condition.
I know, Vito. Money. Lots of it. What's it going to cost me this time?
You got it all wrong, Coop. This information is free of charge.
Finally, some good news today. But I have to ask, why?
Because the threat we're currently facing as a nation takes priority over my need to generate a healthy windfall for my shareholders. I say this because if we don't join together and solve this, and soon, there will be no shareholders or country or planet to worry about.
A bit melodramatic, don't you think?
Do you want my help or not, Coop?
All right. What's the condition?
I'd like to remain online for the rest of your briefing. Having access to the latest intel will allow me to bring my considerable resources to bear and offer a possible solution when the time is right. Now, I expect some of your staff will have issues with a non-vetted civilian attending this conference, so it's best if my presence here today remains anonymous. What they don't know won't hurt them, or you, for that matter. Do we have a deal?
President Cooper chewed his lower lip, considering the offer.
Amanda, want to weigh in on this?
Sir, Mr. Indigo has been nothing but a trusted friend to us over the years. His generous contributions to your campaign, combined with his unprecedented access to all the information flowing across his networks, made our push for office a success. We have no reason to believe he has anything but your best interests and the best interests of this country at heart.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. I'm touched by your faith in me,
Indigo said, swinging his eyes and giving the president a wide smile.
Most people regard me as an eccentric billionaire and prefer to take a wide berth when they see me coming. Only a few recognize that, at my core, I'm a true patriot and a champion for freedom. That's why I'm here, to help in any way I can, for the future of our country and for humanity.
Spare me the histrionics, Indigo. You have a deal, but now it's time to live up to your end. Give me the name of the person who fostered this crisis.
It was Hansen, Jeffrey Hansen.
President Cooper gasped when all his thoughts focused on Jeffrey Hansen. The man held advanced degrees in chemistry, engineering, and biology, and was the founder and CEO of RainTech, the publicly traded defense contractor working on scores of top-secret projects funded by the government for decades. RainTech had been tasked with developing advanced civilian and military applications, everything from the smart bioreactive software that controlled all U.S. drones to the advanced radar-defeating polymers used in the latest class of nuclear submarines. If Hansen had turned on them, things were much worse than Cooper first thought. Much, much worse. Chapter 16. Wyatt Wicke watched as the doors of the van sitting in front of him opened, first the driver's door, then the passenger's door. He hoped one of the occupants was his big sister, though he didn't recognize the new model cargo van. He didn't have to wait long for an answer when a slender figure stepped out and walked toward him with its arms held in a Y symbol. He smiled. There was no mistaking Tally, he thought, even without the response signal. The hoodie, the walk, it was all there and filled with her trademark body language. But there was someone else approaching with her, and it wasn't one of the recruited techie kids he'd heard about. It was a grown man, tall, stocky, and walking with a limp. He was hunched over a bit and appeared to be holding his ribs.
Sis must have hit him with a van,
he mumbled, knowing she'd stop to help any stranger in need, especially someone she'd run over. Of course, there was another explanation. She may have started recruiting old people, realizing that Wyatt had been right all along. You can't run a secure, efficient compound with a bunch of snot-noses.
You stay here, but stay alert,
he said to the 4 gunmen he'd brought along with him. They were all dressed in black-on-black paramilitary garb, something he preferred all his men wear at camp, nicknamed Jericho, a much better name than his sister's, Pandora. He took 3 steps forward, placing himself in the middle of the road. Tally and her companion stopped 5 yards short of his position. Her trademark hoodie obscured her face in shadows from the competing headlights, and the man had a scraggly beard and long hair.
"Hiya, sis,"
he said in a cordial tone, peering inside to see her eyes.
"Long time no see."
He wanted to start the conversation off on a good note. Tally was stubborn as a mule and easily riled. If he wasn't careful, she'd put up her emotional walls, and he'd never convince her to listen. "Hi, Stretch," Tally replied in a steadfast tone, missing any measure of emotion. "Been what, a year?"
"Try to contain your excitement, please. It's overwhelming."
She shook her head, looking at the old guy standing with her for a moment, then back at Wyatt. "What are you doing here, Stretch?"
"Just want to chat, sis."
"About what?" He leaned to the right, looking past her.
"Nice van. Is it new?"
She nodded. "Leased it last month. Always wanted a new one."
"Looks like you have plenty of room for all the kiddies,"
he said, not able to hold back a smile.
"I see you went all out on the color, too."
"Look, it's new. It runs, and the heater and AC blow like crazy. I don't need anything fancy. I prefer practical and reliable. It's better than the ancient sleds you're driving. What are those, Chevys from the 70s? He scoffed. 60s, actually. Classics. Much more dependable than the new crap they're cranking out now, and easier to work on, too. All the electronics and smog control shit just gets in the way. Is this what you wanted to chat about, Wyatt? My new van?
Well, no, not exactly.
I figured as much. You never do anything without a plan. How did you know to be here, on this road, at this exact moment in time? Or do you just think you rule the county now?
I called your place earlier and talked to that squirrely kid of yours, Dre. Why do you have that odd duck answering the radios beyond me? Anyway, he told me you took a trip down to D.C. and said you'd be back tonight. This road is the only logical way back from the south, so here I am.
Yep, here you are, setting up a roadblock on a public road, trying to act like you own the world. So what happened? Did the United States of Wyatt Wiki finally secede from the Union? Oh, wait, I almost forgot. It's called Jericho now.
Mock me all you want, but it's a much better name than Pandora. I mean, come on. Really?
Still singing the same old tune, I see, thinking you're all that.
Hey, you started it. Don't blame me. Kids, can we just get down to business? The old man said. Who's this clown? Wyatt asked his sister. Where'd you dig him up? Some retirement home?
Tally didn't answer his question. Typical when she was pissed. You're obviously not here to chat, Wyatt. Tell me what you really want.
I came to talk some sense into you.
Then what's with all the guns? You don't need guns to talk to your sister.
Guns are essential to ensure an individual's life, liberty, and property. What's the matter? You scared of a few guns all of a sudden?
Of course not. Guns don't scare me, and neither do you. Don't forget, I'm a much better shot than you.
That was once and a long time ago. Plus, the sun was in my eyes, remember?
She rolled her eyes. Nothing ever changes with you. Oh, and don't waste your time quoting Grandpa at me. He schooled me about liberty long before you were old enough, she snapped, looking past him at the 4 other men. Who are these guys?
Backup?
For what?
For whatever. Look around. See anything unusual? He said, trying to make a point.
You mean the rain? You afraid of a little harmless rain, Stretch?
Harmless? If this keeps up for much longer, Earth's gonna look like Mars. Who knows what this shit is?
She put her hands on her hips. Looks to me like you're the one who's scared. You had to bring a posse just to talk to your big sis? Why should I be surprised? Always trying to be macho. It never ends with you.
Those guys, he glanced over his shoulder, are my soldiers.
So what? You have an army now? Is there a war somewhere?
As a matter of fact, yes. The war started this afternoon, in case you hadn't noticed. Just watch YouTube. It's everywhere.
So what am I, your enemy?
No, your family, Tally. That's why I'm here. As long as we're playing 20 questions, who's your friend? I thought you didn't like hanging with old people. Let's face it, you've got serious trust issues.
Yeah, you should talk, bro.
Yes, I'm talking, but you're not listening or answering. Who is this chump?
She paused, obviously thinking it over. Simon Redfall. Wyatt recognized the name immediately. He'd seen the execution that afternoon, live on pay-per-view, when he was in town for supplies, and remembered the unique way they announced her name.
As in Tessa Jane, wife of Simon Redfall?
She nodded, tilting her head like women do when they're annoyed with a man.
You got it. Then what? This is her old man?
Yup. Wyatt looked Redfall up and down, taking stock of his visible injuries.
Looks like someone got a little payback today. I'm guessing the families of the victims?
Pleased to meet you too, Simon answered with a sharp tongue. Wyatt could see the pain in his eyes, both the physical pain from the beating and the emotional pain from what his wife had done.
Just to set the record straight, I view your wife as a hero and a patriot, not an enemy of the state. Standing up to tyranny like that and taking out a busload of government scientists took some serious guts.
You don't know what you're talking about, son.
I'm not your son, old man.
Maybe not, but it wasn't like that at all.
Sure it was. A tactical strike aimed squarely at the government. Pure genius, if you ask me. And she carried it out on worldwide TV. Now that's how you make a statement. Anytime you can take away their ability to create more technology, control is weakened. Job well done, I say.
Let's cut to the chase, Tally said. What's with the roadblock? I've had a long day and I want to get home. Tell me what you want or get out of my way. Do you like standing around in this messed up rain?
What I want, Tally, is for you to listen to reason. This rain is what I'm talking about. It's the end of days, little sis. They finally did it. The government made this rain, and you know what's going to happen next? They're going to come for us. They're going to take our guns, our supplies, and then they're going to take our property. They're going to take everything we've worked our whole lives to build. It's happening right now, just like Grandpa said it would.
You're as paranoid as ever. You haven't changed one bit.
And neither of you. But none of that's important right now. Look, the only way we survive this is to join together, sis. Bring your people and supplies to my camp. You've got the brain power and the technology. I've got the weapons and the muscle. My place is set up far better than yours. If we team up now, we can do this as a family. If we don't, we're done. You know what they say? United we stand, divided we fall. It's as simple as that. All I want is what's best for you.
There's no way I'm joining you. Sure, this red rain might be some type of secret attack, but it could also be... Wyatt knew where she was going.
Enough of the bullshit already. It's time to face facts. There's no doubt what this is, sis.
The answer is no.
Damn it, Tally,
Wyatt snapped, feeling his anger growing. He'd hoped Tally would listen to him. He'd hoped she'd see the red rain for what it was, the beginning of the end. Or maybe the end of the beginning. It was all a matter of perspective. He didn't want to fight with his sister. He loved her and wanted to protect her. But the way this conversation was going, he knew he was going to need to be more persuasive. She needed to see things his way, the better way, the right way. Everything he wanted was for her own good and the good of her people. Chapter 17. Tally was amused when her little brother lost his temper. It reminded her of when they were little. He'd spin out and throw childish tantrums when he didn't get his way. There was no chance he was getting his way now. All he wanted was to be in control and play general. She didn't trust him, and she didn't know his crew. She needed to protect her people at all costs and protect what she'd built. It was the best course of action for everyone on her side of the ledger. She needed to be careful, though. At the moment, she was outmanned and outgunned, and she didn't want to push her brother or his men too far. Their heated conversation was proving that Wyatt was his same old self. Today was simply a rehash of the same argument they'd had several years earlier, the same verbal spat that led to their eventual split. In the end, she knew there was only one way to deal with Wyatt, just like you deal with any other bully. Head on with a show of strength and determination. Tally gazed at Simon, who thus far hadn't said much. He was standing patiently, looking past Wyatt, studying his 4 soldiers, or whatever they were. There was a hint of a sneer on Simon's lips. She could tell what he thought about Wyatt's people. Despite the fact they were carrying ARs and had them outnumbered, Simon didn't look the least bit intimidated. "Don't test me, Wyatt," she said, returning her focus to her brother. "You know we disagree about this stuff. I want to use my resources to help people and to better the world. I want to set things right and free the truth. We both know there are things happening that most of the population has no clue about. The government is trying to manipulate us and control us. That much is true. They lie at every turn, and everything is about spin control. We can't believe anything we hear. At this point, it looks like Grandpa may have been right when he preached to us about their desire for weather control and their plan to lord it over us at every turn."
May have been right?
Wyatt shot back, throwing his arms out and pointing in several directions.
"Look at this stuff, Tally. This red sludge, it's everywhere. Like some disease waiting to strike. Then there's the fact that it's been coming down at exactly the same rate for hours. You can't think any of this is natural. It's obviously engineered and controlled. Who do you think has that kind of power and control?"
"Weren't you listening? I said I agreed with you about the rain. No need to convince me. But back to my point. What I disagree with you about is what we should do and how we should do it. You want to stand toe-to-toe with everything and everyone, shoot first and ask questions later. There's no way that will ever work. It's stupid, and frankly, it's suicide."
"No, it's not, Tally. My camp is well fortified, and I have the weapons and the muscle."
"Are you insane? The government and its military will always have overwhelming force and firepower. We can't win. We can't fight tyranny that way. What about tanks and 1,000 troops charging your compound all at once? Could you defend yourself against any of that? Of course not. Now ask yourself this. What about air power or the use of chemicals or biologicals? Let's face it, all it would take is exactly one bombing run to completely obliterate everything you have in about 5 minutes. Hell, an 8-man special ops team could probably infiltrate your camp in less than 10 minutes. We're all amateurs compared to them. If they really wanted to, they could take us out in a heartbeat and never break a sweat. Get a clue, little brother. You're not what you think you are. You need to step back and think this through. Fighting is not the answer."
"Wow, sis. Looks like you're scared of the big bad government."
"No, I'm not scared. It's called being realistic."
"How can you say that? This is America, and we must defend ourselves against all threats, foreign and domestic. It's our duty and our right."
She sighed, her energy running low. "Listen, we have fundamentally different viewpoints, and neither of us will ever agree with the other. We've been over and over this, and nothing's ever going to change, Stretch. Our grandparents set us up to be self-sufficient. They taught us to prepare for the collapse of civilization, and I am prepared. I've worked my ass off to do things the right way ever since you left, and there's no way in the world I'm going to give it all up and let you take over. You just want to play dictator and blow shit up. Family or not, I don't trust you for a second. I won't join with you, especially not when you show up like this," she said, pointing at his men, "trying to intimidate me."
"Are you sure this is what you really want?"
She nodded. "Positive. Now get those trucks out of my way. I'm going home." Tally turned to Simon and gestured to the van. He nodded and followed her, but didn't say a word. Wyatt's voice cut through the rain, reaching her ears from behind.
"You're making a big mistake, sis. Mark my words. Pandora and Jericho will be forced to join forces, whether you like it or not. It's coming, and you're going to need my help. Mark my words. It's coming."
As Tally sat in the van, she looked in the back and made eye contact with G. Her second-in-command looked concerned, and she didn't blame him after G's first encounter with her brother in town a year ago. Yet G said nothing, letting his fingers pound away at the keyboard of a computer. Tally turned in the seat to face forward, staring out the windshield. The anger inside was building, something that seemed to happen every time she and her brother talked. Wyatt always knew exactly what buttons to push with her, turning her into a crazy, emotional person. "Ah!" she screamed, hitting the steering wheel with both fists, hoping to rid her heart of the frustration that was her little brother. It worked, allowing her to relax a bit. "Feel better now?" Simon asked in a fatherly tone. "Sorry you had to see that."
Nothing to be sorry about. We're all under a lot of stress, and everything gets magnified once family gets involved. Trust me, I know. Nothing cuts deeper than a family member who lets you down. But I'm impressed with the way you handled yourself. It took real moxie to face armed men and not back down. Not many would have, and I admire that. I truly do.
I swear, sometimes I can't believe Wyatt and I are related. I've always had the sneaking suspicion there was a mix-up at the hospital when he was born, and they replaced him with a paranoid megalomaniac. He carries around so much rage and mistrust for everyone, always looking for the next fight. It's totally exhausting.
Well, you handled the situation like a champ, and for what it's worth, your assessment is correct. Standing toe-to-toe with the government and its military is not the answer. They're trained to win that fight every time. It's a no-win scenario on every level.
She gave him a half smile, not quite ready to pat herself on the back.
Thanks for agreeing with me. It means a lot coming from a man like you. Sometimes, though, I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. It's hard, Simon. It really is. I'm trying, but...
You are doing the right thing,
he said in a firm, confident tone.
Still, I know there are times when you must fight back. We were brought up to never back down and to defend what's rightfully ours. I want to make room for some of his ideas, but there has to be balance. You can't just grab your guns every time there's a problem and start emptying magazines at someone. That's why I need your help, Simon. For balance. I just don't have the skills you do.
With age comes experience, and then hopefully a little wisdom. But even then, you're always working in the dark without a net. There are never any guarantees, Tally.
You're right. I just wish it didn't have to be this way. Wyatt and I used to get along great, and I miss those days. I know some of the problem is me, but when he pushes me like that, I react. I'm not proud of it. I want to be a better person, but sometimes I just lose control.
All you can do is your best.
She appreciated his support, but still hated herself for showing weakness.
Grandpa used to tell me that when you lose your cool in front of your team, it makes you appear weak and you lose their respect.
Bullshit, G yelled from the back. It's Wyatt's problem, Tally, not yours. Me and the rest of the group would follow you anywhere. You're a great leader and we all trust you with our lives.
Simon touched her shoulder, rubbing it gently, but his words were silent. She exhaled, holding back tears.
Grandma and Grandpa must be turning over in their graves right now, watching me and Wyatt fight like third graders. It breaks my heart, Simon.
Simon pointed through the windshield.
Check it out.
Wyatt and his men slid into their trucks and closed the doors. A few seconds later, they sped past the van with engines roaring and rock music blaring.
How far away is his compound? Jericho, I think he called it?
44 miles due west, exactly, she said,
putting the van into drive and hitting the gas. A few minutes later, she made a right onto a small dirt road.
Finally, almost home. I am so looking forward to a hot bath right now.
Chapter 18. General Nate Rawlings sat at his desk in the Pentagon, thumbing through the intelligence files spread across his desk while talking on the old-fashioned telephone glued to his ear. His list of problems was growing, but his first priority was finding Jeffrey Hansen, the man President Cooper targeted as the perpetrator of the Red Rain event currently sweeping the planet. His rant continued, focusing his frustration at the unfortunate lieutenant on the other end of the line.
I don't care if he's not answering his phone. I don't care if everyone in the office is on vacation, lost, or dead. Hansen has research facilities everywhere. He's got to be at one of them. Use everything you've got. Pull every string you can. Turn over every rock. Shake every tree. Sell your firstborn. I don't care what you have to do. Find me Jeffrey Hansen.
Rawlings slammed the handset down on its cradle, hard enough to make his wrist hurt. He was shocked the phone didn't shatter, but it held together like a champ. The general hated cell phones, video calls, and especially holo conferencing. Mainly because he couldn't slam a cell phone to make his point, and he'd learned over the years that anger and intimidation didn't translate well across the digital divide. Old school was his preference, not only for communications, but in all things. Technology just got in the way. None of his team had been able to locate Hansen, and they'd been scrambling and searching everywhere. Rawlings knew it wouldn't be long before he ran out of options with President Cooper crawling up his ass, demanding answers. The same leader who seemed a little more agitated and restless than usual during the NSC meeting. Some of it could be attributed to the current state of affairs across the country, but there were other oddities as well. Something seemed off with Cooper, but it wasn't his place to question. It's easy to second-guess a leader's decisions and emotional state from the shadows, but until you've lived a day in his shoes, worry and conjecture were best left for the president's family and for the media. A knock came at the door.
Enter.
His aide, a nervous-looking 26-year-old woman from North Las Vegas, appeared in the doorway.
What do you have for me, Wilkes?
Rawlings asked, thankful she hadn't used that infernal intercom device. Matheson just called. He and Thompson are on their way with the latest intelligence on Redfall, sir.
Send them in the minute they arrive.
Yes, General, she said, still standing in the doorway. Her face looked puzzled.
Is there something else, Wilkes?
Permission to speak freely, sir? Sally asked.
Granted.
Why Simon Redfall? I watched the execution of his homicidal wife, and I can't help but think he was involved somehow. A man with his skills and reputation in the intelligence community would have known she was up to something and stopped it. Since that didn't happen, it seems logical to assume he was involved. If so, why risk bringing someone like him in on this?
Trust me, Wilkes, he wasn't involved. True love can blind a man, even a man of his experience. I've known Simon for decades, ever since he was a wide-eyed recruit under my command and range a battalion during Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. There was something very special about that young man, which is why I had him reassigned to military intelligence. He's a warrior, Wilkes, and a true patriot. Someone who can be trusted, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. After he left the service, he joined deep cover operations with the CIA, and his career exploded from there. Few men can do what he can do, Sergeant.
Couldn't we bring in a team from Nighthawk Services Group? Aren't they at the top of the list when it comes to approved security firms?
Yes, we could. However, NSG's heavy-handed approach to everything leaves me skeptical about their effectiveness. I'd rather turn to someone I know personally. If you check Simon's track record since I recruited him, you'll understand why he's the best man for the job. We just need to find him first.
Do you think he's still capable? After all, he's been off the grid for some time. Skills fade and people change, especially after all he's been through.
You bring up valid points, Wilkes. However, none of what happened was his fault. He's been off the grid because he needed to disappear for a while. You would too, if you had to face the mountain of political and public scorn he did. That's also why he resigned as CEO of Ghostworks, costing his company billions in existing and future contracts, leading to their eventual bankruptcy. The void left by Ghostworks brought rise to Nighthawk, something that haunts me to this day. You have to realize, Simon loved his wife and stood by her until she was convicted, costing him every last penny he raised from the sale of his company stock. The legal bills ruined him, so did the public outcry. I can't imagine what it was like for him these past couple of years. I should have stepped up and done something to help my trusted friend, but my hands were tied.
That poor man. What his wife did was unconscionable.
That much we agree on, Sergeant. While it's certainly possible he may not be interested in helping us find Hansen, I think he will. I'm betting he'll jump at the chance to rebuild his reputation and clear his good name in the intelligence community. Going through what he did would surely break most men, but not Simon. He's a man of deep conviction and resolve. If anyone can find Hansen and uncover the true endgame, it's Simon Redfall.
And if he still declines?
He won't. He owes me, big time. I helped him land the first DoD contract when he started Ghostworks. It's time to collect on that IOU, the general said, growing tired of the 50 questions from a subordinate. He understood Sally's curiosity and desire to learn, but it was time to move on. There were more pressing matters on his to-do list. That'll be all, Wilkes.
Yes, General, and thank you, sir, she said, turning to walk away. Then she stopped and glanced back over her shoulder. Her eyes found Rawlings again. They've arrived, sir. Wilkes stepped aside and held the door open as two men wearing business suits entered the office, one of them carrying a yellow and black attaché envelope marked classified. The general recognized both of the analysts from a security briefing with the NSA director 2 months earlier. The general didn't care much for their boss, Connor Haskins, and figured the feeling was mutual. Otherwise, the NSA director would have made the trip himself instead of sending his junior varsity team.
"Gentlemen, have a seat,"
Rawlings said with an outstretched hand, pointing to the pair of visitor chairs in front of his desk.
"I appreciate the priority response on this."
"Just doing our jobs," Richard Matheson said, putting the security file on the edge of the desk before removing his wire-rimmed glasses. His face looked tired, like he'd been up all night partying at the local sports pub. Thompson, a much shorter man with deep-set eyes and a petite nose, didn't say anything, slouching casually in the seat next to Matheson. Matheson was the senior of the two, but much less impressive than his quiet underling, Jacob Thompson, a keen-eyed brainiac in his mid-20s. The general remembered taking notice of Thompson in the NSA briefing 2 months earlier, tagging him as one of those dark-haired, deep thinker types, always sifting through the conversation, taking in every syllable and searching for intent. Rawlings kept mental files on everyone he met, knowing situational awareness didn't just apply to combat. It also came in handy when dealing with the political types, and that, of course, was basically everyone in Washington, whether they wore a business suit or a dress uniform. "We have what you asked for on Simon Redfall, sir," Matheson said.
"Well?"
the general asked, wondering why the file hadn't been offered to him. "Good news. We know where Redfall was as of 3 hours ago."
3 hours ago is not good enough, gentlemen. I need you to find him now, not tomorrow, not next week. I need him here, in my office, 5 minutes ago.
"Yes, General," Matheson said, hesitating. "My director informed me as much."
"Look, Matheson, let's get one thing clear. This isn't about me. This is about the wishes of the president, the man we all answer to, even your boss."
"Of course, General."
"What's in the envelope, Matheson? I don't have all day."
The pale-looking man took a photograph from the folder and gave it to Rawlings. It was an 8x10 color photo of Simon, sitting with a crowd of people, all of them caught screaming and cheering with fists and arms raised. Simon's lips were caught in a thin, non-emotional line, and his arms were quiet, sitting under control in his lap.
"I take it this is from his wife's execution?"
"Yes, it is. Shortly before his wife was terminated with extreme prejudice."
"Christ, he looks horrible."
Rawlings glanced at Jacob in the seat next door, seeing him fidget.
"Is there something else, Thompson?"
The young analyst finally spoke.
"We have footage of the subject taking a beating in a street altercation near the NEC, then escaping with the help of someone in a white cargo van. We tracked the vehicle to I-95, then it went north. After that, video surveillance across D.C. went dark, sir. The weather is wreaking havoc on the local feeds, coating the cameras with some kind of sludge."
"Did you get a plate?"
"No, only a partial. The last 3 numbers were obscured by the rain."
"And this is what you came here with?"
Neither visitor answered.
"What year was the van? Was it a newer or older model?"
"Last year's," Thompson answered.
"What did TravelNet report?"
"I'm sorry, sir. What are you referring to?" the young tech said, looking at Matheson, then back at Rawlings.
"Haven't you ever looked under the hood, Thompson?"
Rawlings asked with barbed words. Thompson looked confused, fumbling his words. "My old man took care of car maintenance and wouldn't let me near it."
"And what about now?"
"I prefer public transportation. For the environment, sir." Rawlings nodded, expecting an answer like that. He held back a smirk, realizing he knew something the whiz kid didn't. He jumped at the chance to educate the boy in a man's suit.
"Ever since 2013, Detroit has been required to install black boxes in everything rolling off the assembly line. The public was told the device was an event data recorder and only used to track important vehicle metrics leading into a crash."
I didn't know that existed, General. My apologies."
"No worries, Thompson. Not everyone is a car aficionado."
"It sounds like a wonderful idea, though. Would come in handy in court, allowing insurance companies to better control rates through reduced judgments."
Yes, that was the cover story. However, installing EDRs was only phase 1 of Operation Human Domain. Once the dust settled and everyone took to the idea, another bill was passed to require the installation of a free upgrade called the travel chip. It was all new tech, developed by the good folks at Indigo Technologies, and pushed on the citizenry as a better version of the safety monitoring system.
Thompson nodded, but didn't respond. Neither did Matheson.
Now, all the brain pans like you at NSA are able to track the speed and location of every vehicle built since 2013.
That part I knew. However, I didn't realize the backstory, sir, Thompson said.
Didn't you wonder how the tracking was being accomplished?
I found it's better not to ask. Just focus on the analysis and keep quiet. Director Haskins prefers it that way. General Rawlings rolled his eyes and grunted.
At first, I was skeptical about the need for such invasive technology, but NSA kept pushing until POTUS commissioned it with a stroke of his pen. This executive order business has gotten completely out of hand ever since Obama.
With our satellite communications down, I'm afraid TravelNet would be useless, General. Matheson chimed in.
What about the backup system?
Rawlings asked the senior tech, wondering why Director Haskins sent such uninformed text to this meeting. Perhaps their boss did it on purpose, wanting to provoke a reaction from him. Even if he did, Nate wasn't going to stoop to Haskins' level, though he wanted to. The general missed the raw intensity of a good fight, but now wasn't the time.
Backup? If I remember correctly, the new travel chip has a fail-safe system built in. It's designed to piggyback on the public cell phone network for communications in case of catastrophic satellite failure. I remember the theatrical briefing well. Indigo Technologies knows how to put on an impressive show, especially for the feeble-minded in Washington. I assume you've heard of Vito Indigo, right, Thompson?
Yeah, I have. Everyone has. His company recruited me out of Caltech after I graduated.
Then I suggest you and Matheson scurry back to your office and obtain clearance from Haskins to review the project specs. Find me that van. Find me Simon Redfall.
Matheson nodded and stood up. Thompson smiled, but remained seated.
Was I not clear?
The general asked him, wanting both of them to vacate his office and get back to work. Thompson gave Rawlings a look of tempered excitement. You know, sir, it might be possible to use the network of EDRs as a rudimentary monitoring grid. If we could reverse engineer the fail-safe protocols, we might be able to tap into its onboard sensor array and use the millions of new vehicles as listening ports, thereby replacing our failing satellite surveillance. The cell phone network covers nearly the entire country, and so do late-model cars. But it would only be useful for ground-based operations and only provide full coverage in densely populated areas, Matheson told Thompson. We'd still be blind to anything above the cell tower's reach, or out in the boonies where new cars are less prevalent.
Correct, but it's better than nothing. I'm guessing TravelNet was outfitted with audio sensors as well as accelerometers and other tech. If we have Redfall's voice print on file, we could use TravelNet Grid for pattern recognition. All he'd need to do is be standing within audio sensor range of a new vehicle while the key's in the ignition and say something. Then we'd have him.
The annoyed look on Matheson's face faded.
Actually, to be useful for replay in court, the EDRs must be recording on a rugged solid-state drive, something stout enough to withstand the G-forces of an accident. We should be able to search the stored audio for a match if we can isolate his voice from the engine and road noise. As long as he's been in the van and talking recently, this just might work. Yes, I see where you're going with this, but the EDRs have a finite amount of storage, so they must be auto-purging their data. We'd probably only have access to the most recent hour's worth of data on file, at best.
True. However, it might be enough to get a fix on Redfall's position, Matheson said, letting out a long exhale. But damn, that's a mountain of data to comb through. We're going to need to task every available analyst just to make a dent.
Then stop wasting time. Go, make it happen, the general said, interrupting the techno-babble.
Right away, sir, Matheson reported, pulling at Thompson's suit coat. It won't be easy to convince Director Haskins to approve the manpower and comp time.
Leave that up to me. I'll make some calls and push this through.
Chapter 19. After the encounter with Wyatt and his weekend warriors on the road, Simon watched Tally navigate the van through a strand of trees and over a small rise in the dirt road. Simon had been hit by a wave of exhaustion during the trip to Tally's homestead. The events of the day were catching up to him, especially after the lack of sleep during his overnight bus trip to D.C. for the execution. What he really wanted what he really needed more than anything else was sleep. Lots of it. Even his hair hurt, and that was saying something since his ribs were still screaming at him after the beating.
"If it wasn't for the rain, you'd have a wonderful view of my grandparents' farm from here," Tally said, pointing through the red darkness.
She guided the van down the hill, then slowed to a stop when a metal gate came into view and blocked access. Simon tried to read all the words stenciled on the wooden sign hanging from the gate, but couldn't. The red sludge dripping down the sign made them difficult to read. However, he could make out the single word emblazoned at the top: Pandora.
"G?"
Tally asked over her shoulder.
"Can you?"
"Got it," G replied, touching a series of controls on his workstation. The automatic gate swung open, allowing Tally to take the van through and up a gentle slope, parking in front of a sprawling, old-fashioned farmhouse a couple of minutes later. The front door of the building opened, and a young African-American teenager with a slender build and a broom in hand appeared in the doorway. He tossed the broom aside and ran to the van, pulling the driver's side door open before Tally could finish unbuckling her seatbelt.
"Wix, we've been so worried about you. This red rain is insane."
"I'm fine, Dre. So's G. Thanks for asking," she quipped, giving Simon a half smile and a shrug. Dre looked across the front seat, catching Simon's eye. Dre's eyes went wide in surprise, then his forehead creased.
"Is that him?"
he asked Tally.
"Yes, that's Mr. Redfall. He's going to be staying with us for a while, and hopefully join our team if we're all on our best behavior." "You actually brought him here? I knew there was a chance, but Wix, he's so old."
"I'll explain later. Right now, I need you to get everyone together in the meeting room. We have a lot to talk about." Dre's eyes stayed on Simon.
"Hello, Dre," Simon said from the passenger seat. "I take it you don't get many visitors out here?"
"Not old ones," Dre said. "Really old ones with lots of—"
"Be polite, Dre. Simon is our guest."
"Sorry,"
Dre answered in a solemn voice, looking down at his feet. "Hey, eyes forward," Tally said, lifting his chin with a finger. 10 minutes, meeting room. Tell everyone, okay?" Dre nodded, glanced at Simon, then cruised to the house and disappeared through the door, hopping the entire way like he was riding a horse.
"Tally,"
Simon said before they got out of the vehicle,
"I'm not sure I'm up for a meeting with all your people right now. It's been a very long day and I need some serious sack time. As Dre so kindly pointed out, I'm old, and these bones aren't getting any younger."
"I understand, Simon. Shouldn't be an issue. Besides, I need to give my crew a proper heads up about you anyway. The original plan was just to talk to you, not bring you back here. There are going to be questions, lots of them. But let me worry about that. There's a spare bedroom upstairs and some fresh clothes in the closet that might fit. We'll do the introductions in the morning."
"Sounds good to me."
Tally turned to G. "Can you make sure Dre told everyone? You know how he gets when he's excited. I'm going to take Simon upstairs and help him get settled in. Then we powwow."
"Sure thing, Wix."
Nancy Wiggins, Director of National Intelligence, walked down an alley near Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn under the gaze of a full moon with her security detail trailing behind her. She knew they despised her for taking them out in the god-awful rain, a pungent, drizzling rain that hadn't stopped since it started. She didn't want to be out in it either, but this off-book meeting couldn't wait, and it couldn't take place in her D.C. hometown either. Things were about to turn. She could sense it. Decades of intelligence work had honed her sixth sense, keeping her one step ahead of those who wanted her job and 2 steps ahead of those who wanted to unleash harm against this great country. Usually, her focus was directed outward, beyond the borders of the U.S., but now it was needed here, at home. The red rain and its growing footprint were smothering the skies over the U.S., and she knew the streets would soon run red with blood, too. Tensions were coming to a boil across America and on Capitol Hill, and would soon reach critical levels. It was only a matter of time until someone fired the proverbial first shot, and she and her staff needed to be ready. When the violence erupted, there wouldn't be time for covert meetings and back-channel communications. Now was the time to game plan and initiate while she had an opportunity. If the sunrise came and the red rain persisted, soon it would bring widespread violence with it. So she traveled, selecting this urban location not only for the meet, but also to get a first-hand feel for the current mood on the street, figuring Brooklyn was the perfect sample set. New York was the virtual center of the universe, a diverse melting pot of all that makes this country great. The one place where the lines between culture, business, and religion blurred like nowhere else. Whatever was about to happen would happen here first. New Yorkers had a twitchy trigger finger, as did people in Texas, California, and Arizona. Granted, each with a different type of trigger, but triggers nonetheless. Contrary to popular belief, she was not an office-bound numbers freak. She had no idea how she'd gotten that reputation. Sad thing was, if anyone cared to look at her resume, they'd know she'd come up through ops and moved to analysis at age 44, after close to 20 years in the field. Now, she was going to need to rely on her extensive experience for what came next, knowing the fate of America might very well hang in the balance. If events continued to unfold without the president's control, the next day or two might define history for decades to come. Earlier in the president's briefing, it became clear to her that Cooper was worried and would soon transform into a desperate man. That's what worried her the most. Desperate leaders make desperately bad decisions, even with the best of intentions at heart. She'd seen it dozens of times before, and that was when facing typical geopolitical threats like war and socioeconomic disasters. The Red Rain was an entirely new threat, one that required an entirely new thought process, and that would never come from anyone in Washington. She knew they needed help, outside help. Help from the one man who'd always stepped up and helped her quietly whenever she'd reached out to him. A man with access to the type of resources and information she and her staff couldn't lay their hands on, not legally. The greatest moments in history are filled with examples where patriots were forced to break rules for the greater good, especially when countless lives and the future of a nation are at risk. And this was one of those times. She was sure of it. The current task was simple. Find the pyramid-shaped marker and ask Indigo to help track down Hansen. The indigo-colored symbol was supposed to be hidden somewhere in the cut-through behind Franklin's electronics. But tonight, with the endless rain and mounting anxiety coursing through her spine, she might have already passed it. She doubled back, checking the area again. She'd met with Vito 6 times before, each time in a different city. The same protocol was always used to mark the entrance for their digital meet, making her comfortable with the recluse's requirements. She just needed to find it before someone noticed her and her team lurking in the alley under the cover of rain and darkness. Her cell phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't want to talk to anyone, but when she saw who was calling, she answered immediately. "General Rawlings, what can I do for you?"
Director Wiggins, I've got something. I wasn't sure whether or not to bring you in on this, but the fact is, dealing with civilians is better in your capable hands, not mine.
I understand, General. What do you have for me?
I know who can locate Jeffrey Hansen for us.
And who might that be, General? She asked, worried that Indigo's name was about to surface on its own and possibly expose her unauthorized activities.
He's one of your own. Well, he used to be.
Quit beating around the bush, General.
Simon Redfall.
Nancy stopped walking. General Rawlings was right. She didn't know why she hadn't thought of Redfall before, especially since the deplorable execution at the NEC had been flooding the headlines for weeks. Was she getting soft? Or just lazy, relying on Indigo's assistance whenever situations escalated beyond the purview of her office? Had she forgotten how to sift through the data on her own and find a solution by opening her mind to other possibilities? She didn't know the answers and wasn't sure there was time to sort them out either. The Red Rain, she reminded herself, and Jeffrey Hansen. Focus on both of them now. The rest would resolve itself later, assuming there was a later. Then she remembered. Redfall had fallen off the grid, and according to the latest reports, he was somewhere in Oregon, building houses for Laotian immigrants or something along those lines.
"Director, are you there?"
Rawlings asked with heat in his words. I'm here, just thinking.
He's one of yours, am I right?
Was one of mine, and one of yours before that.
True, one of my best. He was one of your best, too, if memory serves.
I hear he's lost his taste for the work, though. Somewhere out west at last report.
Not anymore. He was spotted in D.C. for his wife's execution. We have video of him getting into a vehicle near the NEC.
And?
Video surveillance was spotty in the area. We lost him on I-95 heading north.
Does he have family or friends in the area? Someone he can turn to?
Other than his wife? No. That's why I'm contacting you. A couple of NSA techs were just in my office, and together we devised a plan to track him down through a reverse hack of the TravelNet system.
Did you clear it with the NSA director?
Who do you think sent them to my office?
Then what can I do for you, General? I do have my hands full at the moment.
I was wondering if you could take the lead and nudge Director Haskins along a little faster. This trace should take priority over anything else on their plate at the moment.
She was aware of the long-standing friction between Rawlings and Haskins, two alpha males locked in an ideological tug-of-war. She needed to know if the General's request was genuine or some petty workaround to a personal problem. She didn't care much for the NSA director either, but since she was Haskins' boss, she had a duty to perform. "What makes you think Redfall can help?" she asked.
Don't play ignorant bitch with me, Wiggins. You know my history with Haskins, and you know what's at stake here. Hands down, Simon is the right man for a job like this, and finding him needs to be our singular focus. Once Redfall hears who's behind this, he'll come in from the cold. We both have our claws buried deep into that man. It's time to tap into that history and bring about some swift results. Cooper is all over my ass, and I'm guessing he's all up in yours, too.
Wiggins didn't want to admit it, but Rawlings was right on all counts. Then another memory sprang into her mind with full force. Istanbul. Redfall hated Hansen with a passion. How could she have been so dense?
Yes, I'm fully aware of what's at stake and agree, General.
It's an option worth exploring. Let me take it from here, she told him, planning to ask Indigo to help track down Redfall as well as Hansen. A search on multiple fronts was needed, just in case one of them came up empty, or if Director Haskins decided to drag his saggy rear end with respect to the TravelNet hack.
One last thing, Wiggins.
What's that?
She asked.
When you find Simon, tell him the Big Nasty sent you.
Big Nasty?
Trust me, he'll know what it means. It may help to smooth tensions when you first approach him.
Chapter 20. The next morning, Simon woke to the soothing clatter of rain against the double-paned window in the second-floor bedroom of the farmhouse. He was floating in a half-conscious state, drifting in and out of a dream state filled with blissful memories of his wife. They were visions of events from a long time ago, long before the nightmare of automatic gunfire and blood-stained streets. The silky cotton sheets soothed his skin, and the press from a thick, old-fashioned duvet kept his naked body warm against a squeaky mattress. He turned over, swapping cheeks on a velvety plush feather pillow that he'd cradled around his neck to help relieve pressure and minimize the pain. His body was still recovering and sore in more places than he could count, thanks to a chaotic trip to Washington, D.C. The swirl of pleasure-filled dreams began to fade in his mind, giving way to a burst of conscious thought. His mental slide back to reality had only just begun, but already the new day was giving chase with a heavy dose of painful truth from the day before. Tessa's brutal execution, a chase down an alley near the NEC, a mob beating, red storm clouds unleashing rain from above, and then the fortunate arrival of a cargo van and a strange pair of teenagers asking for his help. He opened his eyes and scanned the room, trying to determine the time of day. Morning or afternoon? He looked at the bedroom window, but couldn't determine the sun's angle due to the weather outside. He felt as though he'd slept for days. His eyes focused on the drips of red covering the glass, another cruel reminder of the final seconds of Tessa's bloody execution. The vision sent a stab deep into his heart, taking focus away from the hazy pink light beaming in through the window. It took a few seconds to regain mental control, but he did. Rain still falling, he mumbled, running a thumb and 2 fingers through his unruly beard. The tangles were thick, reminding him his appearance needed a serious makeover. So did his life, and his future for that matter. An Art Deco-style chest of drawers stood against the wall across the room, and an antique roll-top desk and straight-back chair sat next to the bedroom door, a closed door he chose not to secure the night before. His decision to leave it unlocked broke the first rule of security. What he should have done was change the location of the bed to a more defensible position, then lock the door from the inside and jam the chair back under the doorknob. A wedged chair wouldn't have stopped someone truly determined to get in, but the force needed to dislodge it would have sent the wooden legs scraping across the floor, giving him additional warning and time to react. A vigilant operative would have followed protocol to the letter by implementing sweeping security measures before calling it a night, especially with a house full of complete strangers. Teenage strangers, no less. Strange being the operative word. But he chose not to implement his tradecraft, and couldn't fully explain why. There was something about Tally Wiki that made him trust her, and by extension, trust her crew. He had a hard time trusting anyone or anything since Tessa had gone on her killing spree, but his heart had convinced him to stand down and show a little faith. Then again, maybe it wasn't a sense of trust he felt for the residents of Pandora. It could have been simply the overwhelming need to make amends to everyone across the entire planet, and he couldn't do that if he was paranoid about a bunch of kids. Whatever the reason, he felt compelled to help Wicks, not only for his own personal redemption, but because it was the right thing to do. She seemed genuine and cared about others. Plus, she'd told him an intriguing story about a possible conspiracy involving missing scientists and other interesting facts. But most importantly, her surprise statement about Tessa not being responsible for the shootings had piqued his interest, obviously. He needed to find out more, and the only way to accomplish that was from the inside. He decided it was time to get out of bed and start a new life. A second later, the nestled duvet was free from his body, and his legs were hanging over the edge of the bed. He dropped to the floor and whipped out 100 full-extension push-ups to get the blood flowing, ignoring the discomfort squeezing his ribs and lower back. He dressed in a pair of jeans and a red and white flannel shirt from the closet. Tally had told him the clothes belonged to her deceased grandfather, old-timer clothes. He took a moment to smell the garment on his chest and then take a whiff of the skin of his arm. Yep, both smelled like an old man, a perfect match. He stepped into the hallway and walked to the top of the stairs, where he stood motionless, listening to a voice he didn't recognize coming from the ground floor.
I still can't believe you brought him here.
Well, believe it. It's a done deal.
He recognized the second voice, Tally, and she sounded frustrated. Simon made it down the stairs quietly and sat on the bottom step, facing a small alcove with a statue of Jesus near the front entrance to the house. The voices were coming from the right, down a hallway he assumed led to the rear of the house. To the kitchen, maybe? He was curious. He wanted to hear how their conversation played out before he met with Tally's people. If they were hostile, he needed to know why and prepare a response. His spin control skills were rusty, and he figured a little planning was wise.
Wicks, he's an adult. You know we can't trust adults,
a cracking male voice said. His tone sounded young, like he was just reaching puberty.
I'm in charge here, Diesel, Tally said, and I've made my decision.
But this is our home too, and we're all here for the same reason, to get away from adults and stay safe from all their lies. Having him here goes against everything we stand for.
I agree with Diesel, another person added in a sweet female voice, almost angelic in tone. This is not what we signed up for, Wicks. He's right. Adults always let you down and ruin everything.
Well, Dixie, this adult is not going to ruin anything. And besides, the situation has changed. Just look around outside. That rain isn't normal, and we never planned for anything remotely close to it.
Even more reason to keep to ourselves, Wicks.
A third voice chimed in, this one a deep male voice.
Wrong, Slayer,
Tally said, her voice firm. We need Red and his expertise, especially after what happened last night with my brother. I convinced Wyatt to leave us alone, for now. But knowing him, he'll be back. We can't do this by ourselves. Not anymore. There's too much at stake, and I cannot allow our personal beliefs to jeopardize everything my grandparents built. The world is changing all around us, and Pandora needs to change with it.
You sure about this, Wix? The deep-toned voice of Slayer asked.
I'm sure. And anyway, this isn't a democracy. I've made my decision. Red has the experience, and we don't. All things practical and tactical, the sweet girl's voice added, emphasizing the words that rhymed. Exactly, Dixie. Red has the contacts and the resources we're going to need. We need to adjust. Otherwise, all of this will be for nothing.
Still, Wix, bringing in an outsider is not cool, Slayer said. I'm more than capable of defending this place.
So am I,
the other male said, though his voice cracked, alternating between lower and higher registers.
Look, he's in. End of discussion. I don't want to hear another word about it. Am I making myself clear?
There was silence until Tally spoke again.
Look, I expect everyone to treat him as an honored guest. If you don't like it, there's the door. Nobody is forcing you to stay here. You can go back to your lives on the street, scrounging for food and a place to sleep. It's your choice. So what's it gonna be?
Chapter 21. Raintech CEO Jeffrey Hansen woke with a searing ache across his shoulder and leg, and disorientation consuming his thoughts. The air around him was thick with moisture and smelled of decaying wood and aging feces. He peeled his eyes open to look around, but was unable to see much in the darkness other than a few streaks of light beaming in from above. A series of stiff slats or bars was pressing against his back. It was interspersed with open areas, allowing his shoulder blades, elbows, thighs, calves, and buttocks to sag in spots. He tried to sit up, but couldn't. Something was holding his wrists and ankles in place. Restraints. They weren't rigid like metal or sticky like tape, making him think they were made of cloth. Not that it mattered. He was being held against his will, tied down like an animal. His first instinct was to panic, but his logic took control, screaming at him to take a minute and gather in all he could from the surroundings. He did, letting his memory catch up to his runaway heart rate. A flood of imagery rushed into his thoughts all at once. The sub, the drone attack, the swim to the beach, the spray of gunfire, and the attempted escape with 2 rounds of gunfire hitting their mark. All of it aimed squarely at him. All of it leading to a second swim in the ocean surf before his vision faded and the shadows consumed him. He realized he should have been dead, either from the pair of gunshot wounds or from the saltwater float. An unconscious, bleeding man should never survive in shark-infested water. However, somehow he had. But where was he, and why was he tied to a bed? The wobbly, creaky nature of the bed made him think it had been constructed using lashed-together materials, assuming he'd been hauled out of the water by one of the Caribbean natives. It was also possible he may have been retrieved by the hired hands protecting Carlos Santiago, a.k.a. Jigsaw, the infamous drug lord who owned St. Bluffs Island and the mansion standing atop its southern peak. He moved his wounded shoulder and leg around, trying to gather more clues. Both felt like they'd been bandaged based on the skin pull and tightness around his wounds. Before he could run any more tests, a voice called out to him in a breath-filled whisper.
You okay over there?
It was a man's voice, deep and cautious, coming from his left. Hansen turned his head and told his tongue to answer, but it couldn't, not with a stale stickiness coating its surface. Instead, his chest brought up a series of coughs, making his shoulders lurch as the dry force expelled from his lungs in a rapid-fire succession.
You okay, buddy?
The voice asked from somewhere in the darkness. Hansen coughed again and again, unable to control his respiratory system or the dizziness waging war inside his skull.
Hang in there, pal. Don't give up. You have to fight. My knee is starting to throb, and that usually means rain is on its way.
Hansen groaned, unable to form any words through his chapped and sticky lips. His teeth felt like they were loosening in their sockets, making it clear he needed water and food. Otherwise, the Reaper would soon appear to collect him. All he could do was lie there, weak and helpless, waiting for death to arrive as the life force within drained away with each beat of his heart. The lonely seconds turned into minutes before a half-hour passed, a grueling 30 minutes of pain, dryness, and coughing. Just when his eyes began to fade, a roll of thunder echoed in the distance, giving his will to live a boost. He listened for another clap, and it came. Then another, and another. Each time the rumble grew in length and intensity. It wasn't long before the brewing storm found its way to him, and the heavens opened, answering his prayers. Salvation started as a trickle outside, but rose into a steady downpour that began to drip through the gaps in the ceiling. He craned and twisted his neck as the drops found his face, hoping they would find his tongue. They did, making their way into his throat. Hansen drank all he could, filling his belly with sip after sip. The wind outside grew and started to pound at the structure he was in. A minute later, 2 pieces of the wall tore away on his right, and so did another section along the top. More light was leaking in now, revealing a towering canopy of trees above. The structure he was in was just large enough to contain the cot and a shit-covered bucket, leaving little room to breathe. The walls and ceiling had been constructed using a combination of bamboo framing and interwoven palm leaves. He was in some kind of jungle hut or prison cell, which explained the humidity and the smell of rotting wood and feces.
"Fuck me,"
he mumbled, his vocal cords coming alive. The voice next to him spoke again.
"Sounds like you're doing better over there. I told you the rain would come. You okay?"
Hansen's mouth and lips no longer felt like bales of cotton, but it was still a struggle to speak.
"Not really, but at least I'm not going to die of thirst. Not yet, anyway."
Take it slow and let your body adjust. My name's Crosby, by the way.
"I'm Hansen. Thanks for the warning. Where are we?"
I don't know exactly, but I figure it's somewhere west of St. Bluffs Island. I was a little over 100 nautical from there when my boat was boarded and I was detained.
"By who?"
Cubans, based on the dialect. I'm a linguistics professor at the University of Miami, so I've heard my share of Caribbean Spanish. Plus, one of them mentioned a crisis in Havana earlier.
"What happened in Havana?"
Hansen asked, remembering the last-minute coordinate change for one of his drones.
Not sure. Something about red rain, but that can't be right. I probably translated it wrong.
Hansen expected that answer, knowing that Trident was unleashed over the island's seaport. Trident was originally designed for deployment over major land masses only. However, a last-minute directive from his buyer had added the seaport to the list. Hansen didn't know why it was the only island targeted across the planet, but it didn't really matter to him. The buyer was calling the shots, and for the extra money he was promised, it was worth the last-minute logistical headache. Hansen needed to change Crosby's line of thinking away from Trident.
"How long have you been here?"
Couple of weeks, I think.
"So they do feed us?"
Eventually, though I wouldn't call it food. It's more like baby food paste.
"Do you know what they want from us?"
Everything and anything. Whatever you have, they can sell or ransom.
"Interesting. So they're businessmen."
Sure, I guess you could call them that.
"Excellent," Hansen added. "I can work with that."
Though planning or patience isn't part of their skill set, just look at how they treat their inventory.
"Then we'll have to work fast."
What do you mean?
"If I can negotiate for our release, do you think you can translate well enough to get my points across?"
I think so. What do you have in mind?
Chapter 22. Wyatt Wicke stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the master bedroom of the main house on his property, wiping the remnants of shaving cream with a towel from his chin after a quick set of swipes with a razor. He wondered when more of his facial hair might start to come in, filling in the rest of his planned goatee. 2 of his men were 6 months younger than him, but able to grow full beards. He thought it made them look more imposing and wanted the same for himself. Being a late bloomer physically was always something that caused him worry, but he decided not to dwell on it anymore today. There were more important items to deal with. Tally had ignored his warnings the night before, and the putrid rain was still falling outside, covering his 212 acres of Pennsylvania farmland in a sludgy red. He'd spent half of his grandparents' stockpile of American silver eagles on the rolling hills he called Jericho in honor of the old TV series, and now it was being covered in a stench that made him puke. Every cell in his body knew the government was behind the weather, and even if it didn't smell like ass outside, he'd still be on edge from that fact alone. The compound's ham radio had been busy with increased chatter in recent days, particularly 2 of the designated prepper frequencies, Green Mountain S1 and PrepperNet. Everyone was theorizing as to the origin and purpose of the unusual weather blanketing the countryside, but nobody really knew anything. It was all conjecture, invigorated by mounting paranoia and hatred for those in Washington. Not that he could blame any of his fellow operators, but the endless crowing and false reports were tiresome. A triple knock came at the door. A gruff male voice from the other side said,
Wyatt, I need to talk with you. I know you said you didn't want to be disturbed, but it's urgent.
Wyatt turned and walked into the bedroom while slipping on a pale green t-shirt. He sat on the edge of the bed and faced the door, grabbing his steel-toed, snake-proof camo boots and a fresh tuck of wool socks stuffed inside. He began putting them on.
Come in.
The knob turned, and in walked T.J. Heller, a.k.a. Moose, a bulky 23-year-old former University of Iowa wrestler with a square flat-top haircut and tattoos covering his powerful forearms and thick neck.
Sorry to bother you, Wyatt, but we have a problem.
You mean something other than the endless rain, the government, the NSA, and my stubborn sister?
He nodded.
UPS is here.
Yeah, so deal with it.
But we didn't order anything. He stared at Moose, wondering why he was being bothered with such a mundane issue.
Then tell the driver he has the wrong address. How hard is that?
But he's not at the wrong address. He showed me the shipping manifest.
Oh, and there's not just one driver. There's 4. Someone sent us 4 vans full of stuff. Who did?
Devil Dog Supply.
The tactical place?
Yeah.
And I think they must have sent us their entire inventory. There's hundreds of boxes of ammo, guns, and tactical gear. Some of it is Class 3. You opened them already?
I couldn't help myself.
Fully autos?
Yeah, and a full line of suppressors. But that's not all. Wait till you see some of this stuff.
None of this makes any sense.
Moose smiled, giving Wyatt an excited look, like he'd just hit the lottery.
I know. It's insane.
Was it sent COD?
No. The lead brownie said it's just a drop-off. No money is due.
Wyatt shook his head, wondering what the hell was going on. Part of him was curious to see what else was in the delivery, but the other part was worried this was some kind of setup.
Tell everyone to hold on. I'll be down in a minute. Something ain't right here.
Nighthawk Field Commander Bruce Tanner heard his cell phone chime from inside the front pocket of his all-black tactical uniform that featured an NSG patch on the shoulder and his last name embroidered in gold thread above the front pocket. He pulled the device out and looked at the shiny screen. A yellow hypernotice symbol was being shown in the icon bar across the top of the display, and it contained the number 3 superimposed over the top. He used several twips of his fingers to control the device, opening the colorful message window. 3 delivery notices scrolled into view. All of them were for the same order, and all of them for Devil Dog Supply, the brainchild of a group of 6 former jarheads, 2 of whom had been deployed with the CEO of Nighthawk Services Group in Afghanistan. "It's about damn time," he said, smiling for the first time today. He wondered what had taken UPS so long to bring their resupply of guns, gear, and other more exotic weaponry, including a brand new precision-guided firearm he was itching to try. He'd finally been promoted to commander of Unit PA-1 2 weeks earlier, after Mitch Stanton retired, and was anxious for his first assignment. The supplies were now a week overdue, making his handler in the company's DC headquarters furious. Devil Dog Supply was under exclusive contract as the primary vendor for Nighthawk Service's numerous tactical units spread across the country. As far as he knew, Devil Dog had never been late with any NSG shipment. Tanner figured the strange weather outside was wreaking havoc with deliveries across the country, not just the one designated for their unit stationed in Wilmington, Pennsylvania. He opened the door to his office and stepped into the main area of the warehouse. He'd expected to see stacks of containers and his squad of 25 battle-tested mercenaries tearing into them to uncover their contents, but he didn't. Instead, his men were loosely interspersed with the 7 NSG vehicles and other support gear, looking bored and talking in casual groups of 2 or 3.
Where are they?
He asked the room in a stern voice. Every man who was talking stopped. All heads turned in his direction.
Where are what, boss?
Larry Fritz answered, standing more at attention when he locked eyes with Tanner. The 32-year-old former Army sergeant and Tanner's second-in-command looked confused.
The shipment,
Tanner snapped, holding his cell phone up to make a point.
A second ago, I received notice it was just delivered.
Here? Fritz asked, glancing around the warehouse.
Yes, here.
Fritz shook his head and looked at a few of the other men gathering near him. Nobody else in the room said anything.
Nobody's seen nothing, boss,
Fritz said.
I guess that means our last 2 Ralph rounds for the 50 are gonna have to do?
Fuck, Tanner said, fuming. He'd probably be blamed for this failure if he called in yet another problem this month to HQ. Peebles' bar fight didn't go over well last Monday, getting the hand-to-hand specialist canned and arrested by the local LEOs, and Tanner reprimanded. Failure to control the team was the official wording placed in his jacket, though no commander, not even his former, could have stopped what happened. Peebles was a sneaky, determined little bastard, and when he got any idea in his head, nobody could stop him. Regardless, Tanner couldn't take the chance. Not before his first ever mission as commander. His company creds were razor thin already, and he was desperate to earn a win. Granted, it would be a small victory, but a win nonetheless. He decided his unit should show initiative and handle the problem on their own, and not involve HQ.
Fritz, get on the horn right now with Devil Dog and get me the tracking info.
Chapter 23. Simon waited at the bottom of the stairs until the conversation between Tally and her crew calmed a bit, then walked toward the source of the voices, stopping at the swinging door he assumed led into the kitchen. He yawned loudly, hoping to warn the kids he was coming through. His arms began to stretch on their own, but stopped when the right side of his ribs sent a flash of pain to his brain, reminding him of their soreness. He put his arms down and let the pain subside, then pushed the door open and went inside. The kitchen was much larger than Simon expected. Everywhere he looked, restaurant-quality stainless steel appliances stared back at him, with Gen Air nameplates on each. High-quality stuff, he mused, realizing someone had spent a bundle on the build-out. To the right was a side-by-side double oven topped by an 8-burner gas range with 3 quart-sized pans boiling away. A 6-foot-wide hood hovered above the range, venting steam through the first-floor ceiling with an 8-inch pipe. Simon turned his head and saw 2 large sinks filled with sudsy water on the left, huddled next to a massive refrigerator along the far wall. But what was most impressive were the 2 10-foot-wide picture windows, giving an endless view of the farmland outside. Too bad it was still overcast and raining red. Otherwise, the view would have been spectacular. He counted 8 kids in the room, 4 of them standing in the kitchen, working, while the other half sat leisurely at a rectangle table in front of the windows. Its lengthy wooden top stretched in front of the glass from end to end, providing space for at least a dozen. Tally sat facing him, her back to the window. To her right was G, and to her left, Dre, each drinking a glass of milk. There was also another girl seated at the table, a pretty redhead like Tally, though she looked to be about 5 years younger. Her eyes were a stunning shade of aqua blue, but they only glanced at Simon for a second before turning away. Her arms were covering a hardback book with a bookmark hanging from the top of the pages. All the other heads turned in his direction when the swing door retracted after his entrance, creaking on its hinges.
"Wow, you could feed an army in here. This kitchen is huge," he said, wanting to act like he hadn't heard any of their conversation.
"Good morning, Red," Tally replied.
"Hey, Wix," Simon answered, yawning again, this time for real. "Something smells good. I'm starving."
Breakfast ended an hour ago,
the tallest of the boys said, stirring one of the boiling pots with a wooden spoon. His voice was deep and to the point, making Simon realize the good-looking 6-footer was Slayer. "Let me introduce you to the team," Tally said, gesturing around the room. "On dishes, from left to right, we have Dixie and Jazz." Simon made eye contact with the girls and nodded, giving them a casual smile. They grinned at him and held a lingering stare for a bit before returning their focus to the sudsy water. Dixie was clearly the older of the two. Her Scandinavian looks matched the sweet voice Simon had heard earlier. Blonde, cute, and slender tall, standing in a pair of black tights tucked under a lacy white summer dress. Her hair was done up nicely with a sweeping feathered look and hung halfway down her back, partially covering a black blazer with zippered pockets. Her black boots rose up just past her skinny ankles and were in stark contrast to her perfectly white teeth and rosy cheeks full of makeup. Simon didn't know much about fashion, but certainly didn't expect a former homeless girl turned prepper to be wearing something straight out of a woman's style magazine. He'd seen plenty of them before, lying on the coffee table at home, back when he was still living with Tessa. When his wife wasn't looking, he'd thumb through them, searching for something pretty to order for her birthday. Tessa loved surprises, and he enjoyed surprising her. A match made in heaven. At least until the body parts started flying when her assault rifle tore into them. It was possible Dixie had decided to dress up for the unexpected house guest, but little did she know he could care less. Substance over form was how Simon judged people, even his late wife. He'd first met Tessa at a laundromat, seeing her without makeup or anything resembling designer clothes. Raw beauty is what captured his heart, not a matching ensemble of vanity items. Jazz, on the other hand, was clearly a tomboy and dressed in tattered work jeans, an oversized, faded red sweatshirt, and a stained red ball cap embroidered with the white letter P on the front. Simon wondered if the P stood for Pandora or the Philadelphia Phillies baseball team. The brunette's abundant freckles were unencumbered by blush or eyeliner, and her hair was tucked loosely under the hat. She brushed a collection of dark strands away from her face and neck, making them land on the tops of her noticeably round shoulders. All on one motion, Jazz grabbed one of the knives sitting in a loose pile on the counter next to the sink, spun around, and unleashed an overhand knife throw. The blade sailed across the kitchen and hit something that Simon couldn't see from his position. He couldn't believe it when none of the other kids flinched or seemed to notice. Simon leaned around Slayer to see her target, a dartboard with 3 knives sticking out of it, all of them within inches of the bullseye. Tally pointed at the boys in front of the stove. "And the 2 boys?"
"Men,"
Slayer snapped, interrupting Tally.
"Well, one of us at least."
"Excuse me, men are Slayer and Diesel. They handle all the cooking around here, among other, more manly chores." Simon walked to their position and held out a hand for a shake.
"Simon Redfall, nice to meet you."
The taller of the two looked to be about 18 and Italian, with deep-set, dark eyes and a prominent nose. He was covered from head to toe in camouflage green and attitude, and wore a 6-inch hunting knife in a leather sheath on his belt. The young man grabbed Simon's hand firmly and shook it twice before his masculine voice took over.
"I'm Slayer. Heard a lot about you, dude, though I never thought we'd actually meet."
Tally cleared her throat, catching Slayer's attention. Slayer rubbed the stubble across his chin, then continued, though the tone of his voice sounded rehearsed and deliberate.
"Welcome, Simon Redfall. Welcome to Pandora. We are happy to have you as our guest."
Simon wanted to diffuse the kid's suspicions.
"Thanks for letting me crash here last night. These old bones needed some serious rack time, and in a real bed.
For me lately, it's been nothing but fart sacks in the mud."
The girls at the sink started giggling, and so did G. The other kid was plump and about 6 inches shorter than Slayer. If Simon had to guess, he was pushing 15 or 16, though the puffy white of his cheeks made an accurate assessment difficult. "And you must be Diesel," Simon said, grabbing the grubby-faced youngster by the hand. The kid's palm was extra wide, though his stubby sausage fingers didn't match the width of his hand proportionally. Diesel pulled his hand back quickly, then spoke in an uneven voice.
"So, how long are you staying with us exactly?"
Simon was about to answer, but Tally beat him to it.
"He's staying for as long as he likes, Diesel. We had this discussion, remember?"
"Yeah, sorry, I forgot,"
Diesel said in a fading mumble, turning his eyes away. Simon wondered if the kid's nickname was in reference to his obvious girth. Diesel wasn't fat, per se, more like husky thick. He reminded Simon of a brown-haired, cherub-cheeked bulldog. In fact, Bulldog would have been a better moniker than Diesel. Once the kid grew into manhood, the extra bulk would likely spread out and fill a much larger frame.
"Last but not least,"
Tally said, catching Simon's attention and pointing to the quiet redhead seated at the table,
"is Kat. Say hello to Simon, Kat."
"Hi," she said in a nervously short voice, her hands wrapped around the book sitting on the table. The frizz of her hair stuck out in all directions, like what would happen after 10 minutes of intense electric shock treatment.
"She's a bit shy around strangers,"
Tally said, rubbing her hand on the girl's hunched shoulder.
"Yeah, no lie," G quipped. "When we first recruited her, it took almost a month before she said 2 words to anyone."
Simon smiled at G, one of only 2 familiar faces in the room.
"You look better today,"
G said, with the most friendly voice in the room.
"Much. Another couple of days and I'll be golden. Any news about the storms?"
"Nah, not much. They're still spreading inland and nobody seems to have a clue, but the FAA did ground all flights until further notice."
"That's no surprise. I'm sure the DoD prefers only to have their birds in the air until someone figures out what's causing this."
"No, even their stuff is grounded."
"Are you sure?"
"Yep. President gave an internet speech an hour ago, asking everyone to remain calm and stay indoors."
"Why the internet?"
"Apparently the broadcast towers aren't working too well in these storms. I checked the TV, nothing but static. Same thing for the AM and FM radio stations. Even our windmill is starting to have trouble. I think this stuff is starting to build up on everything, unlike yesterday when it was just running off."
Tally stood up from the table, walked to a cabinet, opened it, grabbed a pair of wrapped items and tossed them to Simon. They were energy bars.
"Do you think the president is worried about some type of contamination, wanting everyone to stay indoors?"
He opened one of the bars and took a bite.
"Could be,"
he said while chewing.
"I'm sure he has the CDC all over this by now,"
Simon told her, instantly wishing he'd stopped himself from mentioning the CDC.
"Then we're all screwed," Slayer said. "We spent all afternoon in it. Everyone's been exposed by now." "Damn it! I knew we should have taken cover. Took me an hour in the shower to get the stink off."
Tally looked at Kat.
"How are your animals doing? Any loss of appetite or sign of illness?"
"No," she said in a soft tone.
"They all seem normal." "What about the weaker ones?"
"Yup, even the rabbits and pigeons. They're all covered in red, but normal. Well, everyone except the stupid goats. They won't come in from the rain, but that's not surprising. They never listen to me anyway."
"Then I'm sure it's nothing to worry about, but we should limit exposure when and where we can, especially ingestion and contact with the skin," Simon said, wanting to keep the panic level down.
However, Slayer was right. They had all been exposed to whatever might be in the red rain, if anything. Either way, it was too late to do anything about previous exposure other than to keep further contact to a minimum.
"There's something else,"
G said to Simon.
"What?"
"Check this out," he said, tossing a compass to Simon. "Try to find north. I dare you."
Simon held the compass flat in his palm, letting the needle swing around and stop once it found its bearing. But it never did, making one revolution after another.
"What the hell?"
G's voice was charged with enthusiasm.
"I went out and checked several spots across the farm, and even ran a mile down the road. It's like that everywhere. I think these clouds are causing it. They must be magnetic."
"I think the term electromagnetic might be more appropriate," Simon said, thinking it through.
"What?
Like an EMP? Slayer asked in his manly voice. No, that's a momentary directional burst of energy, then it's done. If G's correct, this is more like a stable EM field, probably from inside the air mass.
Like a giant mesh charged with static? Tally asked.
Sure, that's as good an explanation as any.
Shouldn't we see lightning by now? Lightning can affect a compass, right? She asked, with eyebrows raised.
Sometimes, but only for a very short period of time, and only in close proximity to the strike. Otherwise, we'd never keep any compass working, Simon said, chewing on the facts. But I think the absence of lightning is an important clue, especially with all the visual turbulence. Lightning is a buildup of static energy created by water droplets and ice crystals colliding with each other inside the cloud's turbulence. Once the positive charge reaches a critical level, it releases to find a negative, usually a tree or other grounded object. Since we're not seeing lightning, this isn't a static buildup and it's not heading for a discharge. It's more like a natural EM grid, something that channels and controls the electrical current within the storm so it doesn't discharge.
You mean like a force field?
Diesel asked, his voice cracking in mid-sentence. I don't know if I'd go that far, but at this point, it's all a guess. The universe and our planet are full of strange anomalies.
Maybe the Earth is cleansing itself?
G asked. Simon didn't know what to say to that remark.
Maybe it's not a what?
Jazz said, grabbing another knife from the counter. She bounced it in her hand.
You mean like a who? Like God? Tally answered. Nah, I was thinking it might be man-made,
Jazz said, throwing another blade at the dartboard.
She adjusted the tilt of her ball cap. Maybe it's an experiment gone bad or something.
Tally looked at Simon, but didn't say anything. It's possible, Simon answered, sifting through his memories. A former coworker of mine now owns an advanced research firm that dabbles in weather-related technologies, among other things. Word has it they're into all sorts of top-secret projects, so I wouldn't put it past Hansen. His will to succeed is legendary, but not always in the right way, if you know what I mean. When it comes to the almighty dollar, men like Hansen are willing to gamble and take shortcuts, no matter the risk or the cost.
Can you call him to find out? Tally asked.
Unlikely. He and I are not on speaking terms. Not since Istanbul.
What happened?
It's a long story. Let's just say I decked him and walked away. That's the last time we spoke.
Where's the field's energy coming from? Kat asked, finally joining the conversation.
That's the million-dollar question. G mentioned yesterday that the ocean air might be a catalyst in some way, and he may be right. But let's not forget the enormous power behind the ocean's current and waves. It's an endless source of energy, if someone found a way to harness and control it. We don't really know how the EM field is being generated, just that it is.
When you think about it, this is all pretty insane, G told him.
Simon agreed. There are a lot of brilliant scientists on this planet, and any one of them might have stumbled across a way to control the weather like this. Hansen is one of them.
Well, not as many scientists as there used to be, with your wife and all, Diesel said.
Tally gasped, swinging her eyes to Diesel. The look of disapproval on her face was obvious as it burned into the young boy. She opened her mouth and looked ready to scold him, but Simon spoke up first. Don't worry about it, Wicks. He's right. My wife did what she did. I'm not going to dwell on it anymore. A man can only take so much pain in one lifetime. So, let's move on, okay?
You got it, Red.
Simon appreciated her understanding. These storms seem to be designed to target specific aspects of the atmosphere, at least above a certain altitude. That's why we're seeing issues with broadcast signals and air traffic. It's all related to an agenda somehow.
That makes sense. It's almost like they're trying to blanket us in an electric net to blind us from something, G said.
Simon, can I ask you something? Kat asked in her meek voice. Absolutely, he shot back, figuring a personal question was about to land on his ears. Hopefully not about his wife. If this rain is starting to build up on things around the world, like it's doing here, what would happen if it started to cake on an aircraft's wings? It wouldn't be able to achieve lift. Basically the same thing that happens when ice builds up. They have to de-ice the aircraft before takeoff. That's what I thought, she said in a fading voice. Someone's gonna have to figure out how to de-red the planet if this keeps up for much longer.
Wouldn't a wide area EM grid also mean the satellites are down too? G asked in a confident tone.
Simon nodded, playing with the compass.
I doubt their signals could penetrate the field at this point. Even radar and ultraviolet may be affected. If we're right, the entire surveillance network is down. President Cooper must be about ready to go postal on his staff.
That's one good thing, at least, Slayer added. No more Big Brother watching everything we do from orbit.
Except over the oceans, G said with a twisted mouth. It's weird. They're spreading everywhere else, but not over the water.
Are you sure?
Simon asked him. Positive. Just take a look at the weather maps online. So far, major land masses only. Well, them and the island of Cuba for some reason.
Probably targeting Gitmo. You know, where they take terrorists for rendition, Slayer added, looking at Simon, then Tally.
G continued.
Plus, I heard one of the talking heads on YouTube discussing it earlier this morning. Though it was hard to watch with the connection dropping in and out like a schizoid on crack, I was finally able to work through the interference with my voodoo. Once I buffer locked the video stream, it played all the way through.
Tally shrugged at Simon, who spoke next.
Since Mother Nature doesn't act this way, then this isn't some random atmospheric event. There's intelligence behind it, which also means there's an agenda in play. If it turns out my old pal Hansen is involved, you can bet your ass this is only the beginning of something bigger. I can't stand the man, but he is brilliant and motivated.
What's the next step? Tally asked.
Until we know more, let's start by securing some things around here to protect them from the weather. Anything mechanical or electrical needs to be brought indoors. Equipment, tractors, the van, everything that's not nailed down.
Tally looked at Slayer and Diesel.
Sounds like a job for the men of Pandora.
Slayer nodded. Will you watch my soup? I don't want it to burn.
Dixie?
Tally responded. Dixie nodded and walked to the stove, taking the stirring spoon from Slayer. Simon swung his eyes to Tally.
Is there an elevated vantage point where I can get a tactical view of the property?
She nodded.
Yeah, I know a spot. But what do you say to a shower and a shave first? Not to be rude, but I can smell you from here. And that hair.
Simon grinned, lifting an eyebrow.
Been a long couple of days.
Chapter 24. Director of National Intelligence Nancy Wiggins waited at her vintage desk for the next appointment to arrive. Connor Haskins was now 10 minutes late, as usual, which she assumed was to send a message. She'd called Haskins earlier, directing the NSA director to prioritize the search for the van carrying Simon Redfall on I-95. Haskins wasn't happy about it, but General Rawlings needed it done, and she agreed with his request. Director Haskins despised her. That much she sensed, even though the long-standing NSA man would never publicly admit it. He answered to her, as did the rest of the 17-member intelligence community, but the current chain of command in Washington didn't sit well with everyone, especially for a narcissistic dinosaur like Haskins. She wasn't sure if Haskins hated her personally, or if his contempt was simply because she was a woman. Old-school spooks like Haskins hated change and preferred things the way they were before the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act was passed, the same legislation that created her DNI position and gave rise to a more coordinated effort across agencies. Wiggins reported directly to President Cooper, and Haskins and some of the other directors, mostly male directors, weren't happy about it. Not one bit. She'd heard the rumors, the innuendos, and the sophomoric flack floating around the back channels about her management style, her pale complexion, and her scowl. Her unofficial nickname was the Hyena, because the mouth-breathers in intelligence were jealous and all thought she had a mock penis. In the end, it didn't matter whether she was liked or respected across all fronts. She had a job to do, and the president was counting on her. The office door opened, and Haskins appeared, wearing his trademark gray suit, red tie, receding salt and pepper hairline, and a face of stone. However, he wasn't alone. A young male in his 20s was following close behind, carrying a thin folder in his hand. Wiggins stood and leaned forward in her Karen Scott Clancy pumps to shake Haskins' hand, but the 66-year-old curmudgeon ignored her gesture and sat in one of the two chairs stationed in front of her imported walnut desk. She swung her arm, aiming her hand at the young man, who promptly took her hand. Nancy Wiggins, she said, squeezing his palm with extra firmness during the shake.
Nice to meet you, Director, the kid said, taking his hand back. I'm Analyst Jacob Thompson.
The pleasure is all mine, she said, shooting a piercing look at Haskins, who was staring at her with glazed eyes and a look of complete disinterest. What do you have for me? She asked Haskins.
The NSA director remained silent and motioned at his assistant to give her the folder. Thompson did.
She opened the folder and found a single sheet of paper inside, printed on NSA letterhead. Only one sentence was typed on it. 1200 Northwest Bell Tower Lane, Lancaster, PA. The document was missing Haskins' signature, an authoritative seal, the date, and the rest of the formalities usually associated with an interagency intelligence document. "What is this?" she asked, waiting for the statue sitting in front of her to answer. He sat quietly, staring at the wall behind her. She couldn't be sure, but the reddening of his face and the bulging vein on the side of his neck made it appear he was holding his breath. "Haskins," she asked in a firm tone. Haskins stuck out his chest.
"Redfall's location, per your request, Director."
"What's at this location?"
"A farm."
"Isn't Lancaster County home of the Amish?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. His jaw was stiff, making him look even more agitated now. "Is there something else, Haskins?"
"Permission to speak freely, ma'am?"
"If you feel you must, then by all means," she said, leaning back in her leather chair with her arms folded across her chest.
"I had my entire team drop everything to focus solely on penetrating the TravelNet system for a voice print match. Thompson here led the infiltration team. In truth, the hack was all his idea, and frankly, I thought it was an enormous waste of resources. But in the end, you demanded results, and my team and I stepped up and gave it to you. I just pray your sweeping redirect didn't compromise the safety of any of my assets in the field while my entire agency was involved in this ridiculous ghost hunt."
"Don't sugarcoat it, Haskins. Tell me what you really think," she said with the same level of attitude he'd just given her. Thompson cracked a smile in the chair next to Haskins, covering his mouth with a hand. Haskins stood up, sending a sneer at Thompson, who was still trying to hide his amusement. The kid rose from his seat as well. Wiggins remained in her chair, no longer feeling the need for decorum. Haskins didn't deserve respect or any level of civility from her, and she didn't really care what he thought of her or what he said later behind her back.
"If that will be all, Director?"
Haskins asked with a tinge of sarcasm in his words. "You know where the door is," she answered, extending her hand in its direction. The two men promptly disappeared from her office, leaving her with only a single sheet of paper for her trouble. Well, that and a skyrocketing blood pressure problem. Before she could bat an eye, her desk phone rang. She answered it with a swift hand, taking the receiver from the cradle. "Wiggins." "Director, I have a priority 1 call for you on the secure line," her female executive assistant reported. "Patch it through," Wiggins told her, figuring it was President Cooper calling for an update. "Yes, ma'am." She waited for the receiver to click, then play a 3-note chime to indicate the line was connected and secure. It did. "Director Wiggins speaking."
"Hiya, Nancy. It's your old pal. Miss me?"
She recognized the voice, but the caller wasn't the president. "Vito? What are you doing calling me here? Directly?"
"You said it was urgent, and you know I aim to please."
"But this is a secure line to the White House. How did you get access?"
"I have my ways,"
he said in a friendly voice, then chuckled.
"You should know by now, there's no such thing as a completely secure line."
She didn't buy his claim. "Nice try, Vito. But I think the answer is much simpler than that. You're with President Cooper right now, calling from his office."
"So that's what you think of my skills?"
"Is that a yes or a no?" she asked, wanting to move the conversation along.
"Nah, I'm on board my private jet, cruising the Atlantic. The view is absolutely amazing from up here. You should really come take a flight with me sometime. I can show you sights your eyes will never believe."
She didn't have time for chit-chat, nor did she want to indulge the flamboyant recluse. "Do you have something for me or not?"
A bit testy. Sounds like the walls are closing in a bit. Am I right?
Sure, you could say that. We've got our hands full at the moment, especially me.
Then you'll be happy to hear that I've tracked down Hansen for you.
She smiled, feeling her heartbeat pick up steam. Where is he?
My sources tell me he's hiding in his deep water research facility.
Where's it located?
Not far from the Bahamas, near the southern line of the Bermuda Triangle.
I need you to send me the coordinates and any available information you may have on this facility.
Already on it. Streaming now to your cell phone.
She'd never given him her private cell number, but didn't want to extend the call any longer than necessary by probing him about it. It was obvious the man had a talented team of computer engineers who could penetrate just about anything. She made a mental note to see if she might be able to hire some of them away from Indigo Technologies at a future date, once the current crisis was over. Indigo continued, though his voice no longer had its usual exuberance.
But I'm afraid I've come up empty with respect to Simon Redfall.
Don't worry about it. We've managed to locate him on our own.
Oh yeah? Where'd he turn up? A psych ward somewhere?
Lancaster County.
Amish country?
Yes, on a farm along Bell Tower Lane.
Then I take it he's converting to their way of life?
One can only guess.
If I could ask, how did you locate him?
She didn't want to expose the fact that Haskins' team had penetrated Indigo's travel net system. She might need to take advantage of the open security hole at a later date. Turnabout was fair play, she thought. How is not important, just that we did. Look, I need to run. Thank you for your help, Vito. I definitely owe you one. Just add it to my tab.
Anytime, Nancy. I'm always available if you need me.
Chapter 25. After a haircut and shave from the 16-year-old model wannabe Dixie, Simon took a long shower and then followed Wicks across the cold, soggy field on foot, heading toward the top of a hill where she'd indicated they'd have the best view of the compound. They were both wearing dark green, waterproof army surplus ponchos and knee-length mud boots as they slogged to the crest. Once there, Wicks stopped, turned, and pointed with red droplets falling from her hoodie, dripping like a curtain of blood in front of her tiny, pushed-up nose. Okay, that's the main house there, obviously. See the window on the upper right, next to the 70-meter ham radio antenna? That's the room you slept in.
Ham radio?
What? No cell phones? Of course not. That's how they track you, Simon. Wyatt and I only use the radio. Grandpa took out the landlines years ago.
You do realize everyone can hear you when you transmit?
Yes, we know the frequency is a party line. That's why we're careful what we say, she answered, pointing her finger at one of the buildings. Now, there's the barn, the granary, and the stables. I know what you're thinking. It all seems a little close together, right? Given how much space we have?
The thought did cross my mind. Plus, if your grandparents were true survivalists, I'd expect to see solar panels, a well house, and a stockpile of steel and other base materials.
Well, there's a lot more down there than meets the eye, including the boneyard you can't see from here. It's behind barn number 3, where we keep all the metal and junk. The way my grandfather laid things out, our entire complex is mirrored underground. We have living quarters under the house, a granary under the granary, food and supply storage under the barn, and so on. It's all lined with reinforced concrete and connected by airtight tunnels. Plus, we've moved our private well underground to secure it from outsiders.
Impressive. How large is your aquifer? Did your grandparents ever have it tested?
Actually, I paid to have it done once I became the owner.
And?
Estimates put it at 1.2 million gallons.
How deep is the well?
200 feet.
And you grow your own food?
You bet. Most of it is just beyond the hill on the right, where the rest of the property flattens out. That's also where the underground escape tunnel comes out.
Simon was impressed with her grandparents' foresight.
Wicks continued. Plus, we have cattle, pigs, goats, and chickens. They're all in the barn right now because of the rain. We're pretty much self-sufficient out here with the help of a nearby stream for irrigation of our crops. We only need to go to town for fuel, electronics, and luxury items, basically.
Like jawbreakers and lollipops, he said with a smile.
She seemed to play along in a playful tone. Is that what you think we are? He laughed.
Well, you know what they say. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then...
Her face turned serious. Trust me, we're all a lot more than what you see on the surface. You need to have a little faith, Simon. Don't forget, it was us kids who tracked you down and saved your butt. He didn't mean to upset her.
No, you're absolutely correct. My mistake. I was just kidding around. Please, go on.
She took out a pair of binoculars and handed them to Simon. Here, check out the fields to the west. Right now, we're getting ready to plant some of our early spring veggies, assuming spring ever comes with all this rain. Simon scanned the rolling hills and saw Jazz and Dre, two of the teenagers he'd met earlier, hard at work in the fields, despite the rain. They were covered from head to toe, keeping skin contact down to a minimum. He let out a partial grin, admiring the layout. Wick's grandparents, who were both 5 years dead, as he'd found out the night before, had planned well on all levels. They'd put Tally's name on all their financial assets before they died. After that, she and her brother had simply gone on as they had before, not bothering to tell anyone they'd died. Out in rural Amish country, no one was the wiser. By rule, people kept to themselves and minded their own business. No one had seen Old Man Wicky or his wife for years anyway, so nobody missed them once they'd passed. Good thing, too, since the Wicky kids were underage at the time, and the state of Pennsylvania would have stepped in and taken control of everything.
It's a shame you're missing solar, Simon said, wondering how they could have forgotten such an important element of self-sufficiency.
She tapped him on the shoulder. It's there. You just need to know where to look. See the huge stand of evergreens to the left of the main house? Simon swung the binoculars in the direction she mentioned.
Yep, got it.
The trees completely surround 65 solar panels, each on a motorized mount that tracks the sun.
That's what, about a 500-foot run back to the main house?
475, give or take.
What about DC voltage drop? She laughed.
It's all AC voltage, silly. We're using microinverters to convert the DC on each panel to AC. As Mr. Tesla taught Mr. Edison during the current wars, alternating current is much more efficient over distance than direct current. At least, that's what G told me, and he's usually right.
Yeah, he seems like a sharp kid.
Glad you agree. And the really cool thing? Each solar panel is its own independent string. If one of them fails, it doesn't take all of them down like a traditional solar array. Plus, using a bunch of microinverters instead of one big central inverter means we don't have a single point of failure.
Except for G, he quipped.
She laughed, then continued. Plus, we can add more panels anytime we need without having to upgrade a central inverter to handle the additional power.
Damn clever, Wicks.
I thought you might think so. It's G's design.
G built this?
Yeah, like I said, the residents of Pandora are more than what they appear to be. G designed everything to be network aware, so he can pull up the entire array from his computer and check the power levels and efficiency of each piece of equipment. He can even make firmware adjustments as well as fine-tune the sun tracking if need be. I should take you down to the basement next. He could run a small country with what he's built in his computer lab. Simon noticed a string of above-ground power lines cutting across the property.
Are you still connected to the grid?
For now. But with the flip of a switch, we can disconnect and be 100% off-grid. We have a huge propane generator, and the solar keeps a ton of deep-cycle marine batteries charged for reserve power on the rainy days, like now.
Impressive. I take it the 2 satellite dishes on top of the house are for TV?
Oh yeah. Otherwise I'd have a mutiny on my hands. But G also uses them for the internet. He figured out how to hack into DirecTV's digital streams for both. Didn't take him long either. Couple days and it was up. Now you know what he means when he says his voodoo can't be stopped.
No doubt.
She lowered her head and started playing in the mud with the bottom of her foot. Simon, there's something I need to ask you.
Okay, he told her, wondering what was about to fly off her lips.
So far, you haven't asked us to show you what we found out about Tessa. I know you said earlier that you wanted to move on, but don't you want to know what it is?
Of course I do. I loved her with all my heart. She was my soulmate. But there's also a part of me that doesn't want to know.
Why?
Because I just stood there and let her die. I did nothing to stop what they were about to do.
I wanted to, but I couldn't. Not after what she'd done.
Okay, I get that. Sort of.
Now, if it turns out you have evidence that she wasn't responsible for killing all those people, how could I live with myself for not trying to save her when I had a chance?
But how could you have known? Everyone saw the videos and knows what she did. No one is going to blame you for not rescuing her.
That's not the point. The point is, when you love someone, you stand by their side no matter what they did or didn't do. That's what for better or for worse means when you take the marriage vows. I got the until death do us part right, but I failed the rest miserably. I failed as a man and as a husband, and honestly, it's eating me up inside.
Wicks spoke in a slow, emotional voice. I understand now. Thank you for explaining. It's sort of like me and Wyatt. We love each other, and even though we don't agree with the other's actions or decisions, we're still family. And family is supposed to stick together, no matter what.
Yes, exactly. Someday when you're married, you'll understand the deep bond I shared with my wife. Even though she broke my heart into a million pieces, I never should have abandoned her when she needed me most.
Simon fought back the tears, waiting to pour from his eyes.
When Tessa called out for me, right before she was killed, I thought my heart was going to explode.
I can't even imagine.
I'll never forget that moment for as long as I live. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Every inch of my body hurt, and I wanted to die. Truth is, if I'd had a gun on me, I would have stuck it in my mouth and pulled the trigger without a second thought.
I'm glad you didn't, Wicks said, rubbing his shoulder gently with her fingers. Simon was about to give her a hug, but stopped when he saw movement coming from the back of the house. Someone was on a dirt bike, fishtailing and slinging mud everywhere.
Here comes Diesel,
Tally said, changing the tone and inflection of her words. She must have wanted to change the subject as much as he did.
Damn, that kid can ride,
Simon told her, watching the youngster power through the countryside like a world-class motocross racer. That's an understatement. Plus, he can fix just about anything mechanical, too. Diesel turned and flew straight up a hill and stopped with a power slide in front of Tally and Simon. He took his helmet off, panting in short breaths. What's up? Wicks asked him.
Stretch is on the radio. He says he needs to speak to you immediately.
Is something wrong?
I don't know for sure, but your brother sounds worried, or maybe he's pissed. I can never tell which.
Chapter 26. General Rawlings waited for the runny-nosed cashier with countless piercings covering her ears, face, and neck to hand him the correct change for the $20 bill he'd just given her. His nose drew in a long rush of air. The delicious aroma of the food sitting in front of him on the counter came drifting in. Steaming hot cup of finely brewed coffee, stuffed blueberry scone with a lemon glaze, and a freshly baked raisin bagel, topped with a generous scoop of homemade cinnamon butter. 20 minutes ago, he'd decided to take a break from work and slip away from the insanity swirling about his office. His crack team was on top of things, and he needed a few minutes to decompress. His favorite spot for a morning break was Belle May's Bread Emporium along the waterfront in D.C., not far from the charming boathouses of Barney Circle. The combination of killer Java and freshly baked treats kept him coming back day after day, even in bad weather like today, and yesterday for that matter. His stomach decided to join the conversation, letting out an extended gurgle, catching the ear of the cashier. Sounds like someone is extra hungry today, young Brittany said with a cute smile, handing him a combination of bills and coins.
You don't know the half of it,
he said, stuffing the change into his front pocket, never bothering to count it.
See you tomorrow, General,
Brittany said, sniffing twice and rubbing her watery eyes and nose. Hopefully the rain will stop before then. I don't know how much more of this I can take. He gave her a friendly nod, grabbed the plastic serving tray, and took his food to a table near the front window, wondering why he hadn't decided to forego his usual order after noticing the cashier was sick. Brittany was here because she needed to be. 2 little mouths to feed at home, if he remembered correctly from past conversations. That was her excuse, but what was his? He'd only seen a handful of people on his way to the bakery, meaning he was one of the crazy few those dumb enough to be out in a dreadful, never-ending storm. Plus, now he was taking a chance on catching the flu from the beautiful high school dropout, something he couldn't afford, not with the American people suffocating under a blanket of red and a lame duck president demanding answers. In truth, he was too tired to care. He needed his morning sugar rush to recharge his batteries after a night without much sleep. He knew from his years of experience in the mud that tradition and routine were stronger than glue, keeping sanity and logic working together, even as the world is unraveling all around you. He might change his schedule at some point in the future, but not now and not today. Not when his brain needed the comfort and stability of his long-standing daily face stuffing at Belle Mays. The chair was already sitting ajar from the table, allowing him to wedge his backside into it without having to put the tray on the surface to free his hands. The wooden legs screeched across the tile floor as his momentum slid the chair to make room for the rest of him, mainly his gut, the ever-expanding orbit around his middle. He wasn't proud of the recent weight gain, but ever since he broke his ankle the previous summer, he couldn't jog his usual 4 miles a day. At least, that was the excuse he told his family and friends. The official reason he hadn't been exercising was due to the lack of sleep. There was a stabbing pain in his gut, just above and to the right of his now sunken navel, keeping him up most nights and perpetually exhausted. He planned to visit old Doc Marino, a competent retired lieutenant general, when he got a chance, but hadn't had the time with President Cooper ringing him every 5 minutes. He cut the bagel in half, lathering one side of it with a bounty of cinnamon spread. The butter began to melt as soon as it landed on the warm surface, making his mouth water and his throat tingle. He brought the slice to his lips and was about to bite down, but stopped when a suite of black-colored SUVs rolled up with a skid outside the bakery. The 5 vehicles promptly blocked access to the eatery as the doors opened and a squad of security personnel surrounded the SUV stationed in the center. A small, slender person stepped out of the middle truck with her head lowered. Rawlings assumed it was a woman based on the VIP's small stature and length of hair, but he couldn't see her face. She was wearing head-to-toe rain gear while being escorted by 4 of the men, one of whom was holding an umbrella over her. She moved briskly and came inside, turning right and cruising straight at Rawlings as if she knew exactly where he was sitting. She pulled back the hoodie to reveal her face. It was Director Wiggins.
"Nancy?"
he asked.
"Why aren't you at your desk?"
He paused, choosing his words.
"I needed a break. A man can only work so many hours straight before the walls start talking, and trust me, they were about to do just that."
He waited for her to respond, but she didn't. He continued.
"I'm sure you know the drill. When your blood sugar gets low, your brain stops working, and your hands shake. We all need to eat once in a while, even you by the looks of it. How did you find me?"
"It's common knowledge you frequent this establishment every day, General," she said, flashing a glance at her watch. "Let's face it, a blind monkey could have tracked you down." He smiled, amused at her choice of words.
"You mean like Director Haskins?"
She laughed, though it didn't appear she wanted to.
"Yeah, he's a real piece of work. I don't know how he keeps his job with an attitude like that. He never used to be that way."
"I'm sure he has dirt on everyone by now, and I'm betting he isn't afraid to use it to save his own hide."
"No doubt. But seriously, Nate, you should consider varying your schedule now and then."
"Duly noted. But honestly, I didn't think anyone was watching or cared where I grabbed a cup of joe."
"Trust me, someone's always watching. At least they used to be before this rain took out our eyes and ears," she added, sounding like a woman on a mission.
"I assume this is about Jeffrey Hansen?"
"Among other things," she said, with a grim look on her face. She held out a hand in the direction of the door.
"Please come with me. We have a lot to discuss."
He craned his neck down, admiring the red-colored tray of food and coffee, none of which had hit his lips yet.
"Please, General, it's urgent,"
she said, tugging at the back of his chair. He stood and walked to the coat rack where he snatched his raincoat and umbrella, then turned and followed Wiggins and her chicken legs out of the store and into the back seat of her SUV. The driver hopped out of the vehicle, then the open doors closed around them. The second they were alone, she twipped her fingers in the air, entering a series of virtual commands into the console that had been installed on the back of the seat in front of her. A millisecond later, all 4 doors and the rear hatch locked themselves with a loud, simultaneous click. Then the floorboard area filled with a red-colored ambient light. The SUV's control system spoke in a soft, female voice. "Counter-surveillance protocols initiated. Interior secure." Nancy flared her eyes at him.
Director Haskins and his young analyst Thompson paid me a visit. The TravelNet hack was a success.
They found Simon?
Yes, in Lancaster County.
Where?
On a farm owned by a couple of senior citizens. I have the exact address.
I wonder what he's doing in Amish country.
Only he can answer that.
What about Hansen? Any luck? So far my staff's come up empty.
Yes, as a matter of fact, my sources tell me he's at his secret deepwater research facility in the Bahamas.
I wasn't aware he had such a facility.
She gave him a stern look.
Hence the word secret.
Have you briefed President Cooper?
Rawlings asked, ignoring her jab and wondering what his commander-in-chief might be expecting.
A few minutes ago. That's why I'm here. He wants my agency to lead the mission in the Atlantic for Hansen.
That's not SOP.
Those were my words exactly, but apparently this crisis has POTUS changing protocols and duty assignments across the board. Why? I have no clue. It doesn't make sense. I don't know if he's running scared because of the issues with the drones or the rain, or possibly he's privy to information that I'm not. But regardless, it's not my place to question the motives or decisions of POTUS.
Nor is it mine. What the president wants, he gets, even if it's a little unusual.
I take it you've noticed his odd behavior, too.
Yes, I think we all have. But considering what we're facing as a nation right now, how stable would you be if you were in his position? Being responsible for the fate of nearly 400 million Americans can't be easy.
Good point. I'm sure it's nothing,
she said, letting her words tail off in volume. Rawlings winced in pain, feeling the bulge in his stomach press against something inside.
You okay, Nate?
Yeah, just my stomach. Been acting up lately.
So has my back, she said,
letting her face sag, looking like the old woman she really was. Her layers of makeup couldn't mask the ravages of time.
These jobs of ours, they're taking a toll on all of us. I hope it's all worth it.
He gave her a quick nod, not wanting to keep the focus on their respective health issues.
What about Redfall?
You need to handle it, she said, while I take care of Hansen.
I'm curious. Was that your idea or the president's?
I never told him about Simon. I think it's best if you and I handle the Redfall situation on our own. With all the world's focus on his wife's crimes and subsequent execution, I'm sure POTUS would never sanction the involvement of someone so notorious.
Rawlings was pleased she was on the same page.
No, you're right. It would be a geopolitical nightmare, he told her, visualizing the G20 leaders coming unglued.
Until we have a sit-down with Simon, let's keep this between us. POTUS has enough on his plate, and frankly, I don't want to run the risk of Simon being tasked to someone else. We could lose containment of the one asset that may be the solution to all of this.
The general nodded, thinking it through.
I agree. Something doesn't feel right.
Yeah, my gut's been nagging at me too. There's more here than simply a DoD contractor gone rogue. Granted, Hansen is brilliant and has the means, but I question whether he has the balls to pull off something this big, and do it alone. If my team misses on Hansen, Simon may be our last best hope to bring him in.
Or to stop him.
She nodded in rapid succession, like her mind was coming to the same conclusion.
If it comes down to that.
What do you suggest, Director?
Since we've agreed to keep this off book, I'm guessing you'll want to use Nighthawk to handle the domestic action.
Is that a question or a suggestion?
Maybe a little of both?
Well, we both know NSG is capable, the general told her, choosing his words carefully. Though, I have genuine concern about NSG's tendency to employ more force than is necessary. If this mission were overseas, we could spin it while looking the other way. But at home, a more delicate touch is needed to minimize any potential collateral damage. You know as well as I do that Simon will resist if Nighthawk comes at him hard. Innocent people may get caught in the crossfire, and none of us wants that, especially now, with everyone on edge because of this weather. So far, the general public has been relatively calm, but that could change at any minute. We don't need NSG sparking a countrywide panic.
She hesitated, obviously mulling it over.
Let me make a call to Nighthawk's CEO. I do have Blake Anderchuk's ear. I should be able to soften him up for you. I'd appreciate that, Nancy. While you're at it, can you arrange a face-to-face for me? The details of this op need to be handled one-on-one as I lay out the rules of engagement.
Consider it done, General. Chapter 27. Wicks raced upstairs on her way to the ham radio to chat with her brother, worrying he was hurt or in trouble. After her brutally honest chat with Simon about his wife and what it meant to be part of a loving family, her heart had softened a bit toward her brother. She nudged G out of the way in the second-floor home office that her grandfather had built. The custom workspace featured a horseshoe-shaped oak desk with cabinets and file drawers where Wicks took a seat in front of the base station sitting in the center. Simon stood next to her as she wrapped her fingers around the vintage desktop microphone and squeezed the transmit button. WX6FR, WX6FR. WX6FR, this is ZS5BD. Zulu X-Ray 6 Foxtrot Romeo calling and standing by. The frequency cracked and hissed, then a voice was heard over the airwave.
Hey, sis.
What's wrong, Stretch?
I suppose you think this is funny?
What?
The shipment from Devil Dogs. Is this some kind of joke?
Her voice hesitated. So did her brain.
Huh? What are you talking about? The guns, the ammo, the tactical gear, and the explosives you sent us. Jesus, sis, you must have spent a fortune. What did you do, cash in your entire stash?
Wyatt was referring to her extensive collection of silver eagles, roughly half of her inheritance. She looked at Simon, wanting to explain to him what Wyatt meant. She wasn't sure why, but she felt compelled to let Red know her half of the coins was worth over $2 million now that the spot price of silver had reached $145 an ounce. But she decided against it. There were other, more impressionable ears in the room who didn't need to know that type of confidential information. She decided to tell him later, when they were alone. She squeezed the mic again.
Wyatt, what the hell are you talking about? I didn't send you anything. Seriously? You didn't? No, I promise, I didn't. Neither did my team. I give you my word. Then who the hell did? And why?
Simon tapped her on the shoulder. Ask him what kind of weapons and explosives were sent. Wicks did as he requested. They waited for an answer.
Fully auto AKs, AR-10s, short-barreled shotguns, top-of-the-line suppressors, and a frickin' stockpile of tannerite, Wyatt said. Plus, there's a shit pile of boxes we haven't even opened.
Tannerite? Binary explosives? She asked.
Yeah, hundreds of pounds of it, enough to start World War III.
Simon leaned in and wrapped his hand around hers, speaking into the mic. Wyatt, this is Simon. Whose name is on the manifest? Does it show who ordered the shipments?
No, he responded. I checked every page carefully, just my name and address on all 4 packing lists. That's why I called Tally, figuring she was screwing with me big time, trying to make one of her points again.
4 packing lists? Simon asked him.
Hell yeah, 4 long lists. Imagine my surprise when a caravan of UPS trucks rolled up with a ton of stuff we never ordered.
I need you to look at the paperwork. Do they show an order number? Wyatt didn't respond for a few seconds.
Nope. I don't see anything that looks like an order number.
Simon looked at Tally, then back at the mic, pressing the trigger. The BATF tracks the sale of these types of weapons closely, meaning extra paperwork, tax stamps, and a waiting period on each. That narrows down the list of buyers quite a bit.
Plus, here in PA, the sheriff has to sign off on their purchase first,
Wyatt said on the radio. I thought those types of weapons could only be shipped to a registered FFL dealer, Wicks asked, while the microphone was still active. Correct, Simon answered. But neither of us is licensed, she said. Simon didn't respond.
It wouldn't take much for someone with skills to hack in and change the delivery address, G said.
Simon let go of the microphone trigger and stood straight, looking at Wicks. An order of this size rules out a weekend warrior or someone stocking up for hunting season. There must be an organization behind this.
A private organization, since the feds and the military don't use UPS, or devil dogs for that matter. Her face pinched.
What does all this mean?
Simon exhaled, letting his nerves calm a bit.
I think someone is trying to set your brother up.
For what? Do you think it's related to the rain outside?
I'm not sure yet, but arming civilians?
Militants, in Wyatt's case, G interrupted.
Yes, arming militants has a specific strategic value. That's assuming someone wanted to spark an uprising, he told her, chewing through his memories. Back when I was in military intelligence, I distinctly remember a tactical training scenario involving this very thing. However, unless another faction is armed as well, it's much less effective.
G shot a panicked look at Wicks.
The Carnegie brothers.
Who? Simon asked her.
Sean and Sebastian Carnegie, twins. A couple of mullet heads we went to school with. Complete assholes. Their family controls most of the moonshine business around here. Wyatt's had run-ins with them before. They can't stand each other.
Plus, they're the true meaning of militants, G added.
There was more to tell Simon, but she didn't want to share the entire backstory. Some of it was her fault, and all of it painful, so she decided not to read him in. Maybe later, when the time was right. For now, she wanted to keep Simon on their side and not give him reason to reconsider helping them.
Their camp is west of here, in York County, and it's 5 times the size of Wyatt's, she said, with a worried look on her face. They're a pair of inbred hillbilly types and end-of-the-world fanatics, just looking for a reason to hurt people.
I think we need to consider the strong possibility that the Carnegies may not be the only ones. There could be more. Someone may be sending truckloads of guns and ammo to groups all around the country.
Then all hell's about to break loose, she said, grabbing the microphone. Wyatt?
Yeah, sis?
We think the Carnegie brothers may have received a shipment as well.
You've got to be kidding me. Why?
Someone may want us to start shooting at each other. You need to be prepared. The Carnegies may not be the only ones.
Fucking government,
he said over the frequency, with thick hatred dripping from his words.
I knew it. That's why they sent the rain, to distract us from their real agenda.
Simon doesn't think the feds are involved, she transmitted.
Why not?
They don't use UPS and don't order from devil dogs. They have their own trucks and suppliers. He thinks a private company is behind what's happening.
That's a little hard to believe, sis. Then what about the rain?
Maybe it's to blind the feds. We don't think their satellites are working right now.
Jesus Christ, what the hell is going on?
Wyatt said.
I don't know, bro, but I'm really scared.
We should join forces, Tally, like I've been telling you all along.
She didn't answer him. Simon turned to G. How good is your mojo?
You mean my voodoo?
Simon agreed, but held his tongue.
The best. What do you need?
A database hack?
Easy peasy. Who's the target?
Actually, it's targets, Simon said, turning his focus back to her. Ask your brother for the tracking numbers. G might be able to follow the order back through UPS and into Devil Dog's system.
What do you mean, might?
G asked, with eyebrows pinched and a wrinkled nose. Sorry, will be able to follow the order back through UPS. Big outfits like those track every detail about an order in their database, so the answer's in there somewhere. We just need to isolate the electronic trail and trace it to the original purchaser by cross-checking the data. Then we follow the money trail. Regardless of whether it was paid by cash, credit card, or wire transfer, someone had to pay for it.
G's face lit up. I see where you're going with this. The large amount would require the financial institution involved to report it to the IRS. Chances are it's been flagged as a reportable sale, limiting the search criteria.
Simon continued, appreciating the kid's quick thinking. Once we know whose tax ID number it's under, we have him. We just need to find it.
Oh, I'll find it. Count on it, Red.
Wicks nodded and obtained the tracking numbers from Wyatt. Chapter 28. Bruce Tanner hung up the receiver of his office phone in Nighthawk's Willington field office and finished scribbling down the last of the intel he'd just obtained from his nephew in the University of Pittsburgh computer lab. As usual, Andrew came through like he'd done the previous 4 times Tanner had called the brilliant graduate student. Tanner stood from his chair, folded the paper containing the delivery address for the missing Nighthawk shipment, and stuffed it into his front pocket. He prayed the tracking info was correct, worrying that his nephew had liberated the Old Mill Road address too easily from the UPS hack. It was a long drive to the rural location in western Pennsylvania, and he didn't think they had the time to attempt recovery at a secondary location if the first proved to be an error. HQ was due to check in later, meaning his unit had one chance to recover the weapons and gear on their own. He charged out of his office and headed for the armaments section of their warehouse.
Gear up, gentlemen,
he shouted, passing through the vehicles and other support equipment.
Destination and flavor, sir?
His second-in-command asked.
Western PA, Mr. Fritz,
he answered, peeling an ATF banner from the patchboard and slapping it against Fritz's chest. He could have chosen a patch from a number of other agencies, such as DHS, FBI, or even SWAT, but decided a weapons recovery mission was best suited for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Nighthawk Services Group had been authorized by special legislative charter to operate domestically, and to do so by impersonating various law enforcement agencies on an as-needed basis. All of it was legal and approved by Congress after the Ellsworth Air Force Base incident a decade earlier. The term incident was the politically correct term for what had happened at the military base, even though the number of civilians killed that day numbered in the thousands. Massacre would have been a better choice for its official name, but it wasn't up to him. The commander of the airbase wasn't prepared and overreacted to the sudden threat storming their gates. They opened fire on American citizens, both armed and unarmed, causing a collective gasp and uproar across the country on both sides of the issue. In response to the outcry, the administration in the White House decided the U.S. needed a much larger domestic security force to deal with such uprisings and lobbied Congress to approve sweeping changes to the DHS charter. The House and Senate followed through by passing a new bill to allow DHS to expand their roster of trained mercenaries. Basically, the new law authorized Homeland Security to hire any contractor with top-secret clearance and then use the mercenaries however they deemed fit, all without a shred of oversight. That single piece of legislation gave explosive rise to two private security companies, Ghostworks LLC and Nighthawk Services Group. Tanner wasn't sure what the public would think if they knew about his group's ability to don the insignia of any well-known law enforcement agency, but he was thankful for the advantage. It had a calming effect when Nighthawk rolled up on a scene, keeping everyone compliant and none the wiser. A cooperative citizenry meant fewer incidents, and that, of course, was good for everyone. The only wild card was the freedom fighters. When they were involved on the other side, his team went through ammo and explosives at triple the normal rate. His tactical vest was a little snug after he slipped it on, making him adjust the fit. Then he opened the various pockets and pouches, stuffing them with the essential gear needed, including additional preloaded magazines for his Glock Model 22, a fresh canister of pepper spray, rubber pellets, extendable baton, and a 53 million-volt stun gun with 2 extra taser cartridges. Company regulations required each member to carry several types of weapons, providing both lethal and non-lethal solutions to any situation. When he first joined NSG 8 years ago, they called the suite of weapons lethal and non-lethal responses. But the tail end of that phrase was later changed to use the word solutions after it became clear to the brass that most NSG teams chose the lethal route first, finding it the most effective solution in most situations. In truth, lethal responses proved to be much more efficient, though not morally acceptable for those in opposition, at least not in the early years. However, when faced with imminent threats, Washington was quick to erode civil liberty for additional layers of American safety. Controlling its citizens, not protecting them, had become the new standard in U.S. law enforcement. Tanner welcomed the ideological shift since it kept the press and lawyers at bay, allowing his unit to complete their missions quickly and on task. It took several minutes, but he finished his standard loadout with his sidearm and duty belt, then grabbed 2 energy bars, a set of cuffs, ballistic glasses, gloves, knife, helmet, flashlight, and a notepad and pen. Had the resupply occurred before this mission, he would have snatched extra AR magazines and a few other items of choice. However, since inventory was running low, he decided to skip them, leaving what little stock they had remaining for his men. He pulled the Glock from its holster, racked the slide to inject a .40 caliber round into the chamber, then put the semi-auto back into its secure location on his hip. Most of his men preferred the Model 30, feeling the large .45 caliber provided them with the firepower they needed. He preferred the .40 with less recoil, feeling his accuracy was better from a distance. Plus, he could carry more rounds. An AR-15 with red dot optics was his rifle of choice, and he grabbed one before he climbed into the passenger seat of the command vehicle. It wouldn't be long before Fritz joined him in the driver's seat. However, he couldn't say the same for his men. He felt some of them were loaded too heavily, covering a wide spectrum of gear. After he was promoted to field commander, he changed the unit's policy to allow each man to decide for himself what their standard loadout would be. He believed a happy team was an efficient team, especially when it came to their preferred carry items. They were all putting their lives on the line, same as him, and he wanted each of them to choose how they wanted to protect their own six. Chapter 29. Jeffrey Hansen ducked his head and rolled through the filth after the kidnappers tossed him back into his cell. The stitches across the bullet holes in his leg and shoulder were holding together, but he was worried his wounds would soon become infected. The sanitary conditions were deplorable in the jungle, and in his weakened condition, his body would have a hard time fighting off an invasive swarm of bacteria or disease. At least he wasn't tied down to his bunk this time, leaving him free to move around the tiny hut. His neighbor in the next cell over, Crosby, called to him. "Hey, buddy, you alive?" "Barely." "How'd it go?" "Well, I pitched them, but they seemed less than receptive. Then again, the Spanish you taught me might have sounded like some hippie version of Bantu Swahili to them." Crosby laughed but didn't respond. Hansen continued. "Regardless, millions of dollars rings true in any language. One good thing, they did bring a doc who gave me fluids and stitched me up. He spoke some English, which helped, but the quack's hands were shaking and his face was 3 shades beyond pale. I thought he was going to pass out. There's nothing quite like seeing a nervous bush doctor coming at you with a sharp object in his hands." "He was probably under duress." "Possibly," Hansen said, craning his neck and turning his shoulder toward the light leaking in from above. He could see some of the stitches. "But from what I can see of the patchwork, he's not going to be applying for a staff position at Johns Hopkins anytime soon. I think a drunken sailor would have done a better job than that witch doctor." Crosby laughed again, harder this time. "At least they decided to treat you. That must mean they're considering your deal. Otherwise, they wouldn't care if you lived or died." "Let's hope. Then we can both get out of here. It's only a matter of time before sepsis finds me, and I won't last a week out here with an infection." "Thank you for including me. I know you didn't have to." "A deal is a deal, and I'm a man of my word." "Did they buy your Red Rain explanation?" "I don't think so. Not by the dumbfounded looks on their faces." "You might not know this, but Cubans are a very superstitious people, blaming everything bad that happens in their lives on evil spirits." Hansen's mind played a vision of the devil with a pitchfork. "I can't imagine what they think is behind the storms, but I did get the impression they were going to run my idea past their boss. At least, that's what the witch doctor alluded to when he translated their response for me." "Did they mention a name?" "Not directly, but I'm starting to think this outfit works for Jigsaw." "Carlos Santiago?" "Yup. They're drug runners, all right. That much I'm sure of based on what I saw in their camp. Since all the drug traffic in this area of the world is controlled by Jigsaw, I don't see how they couldn't be connected." "I agree. Working in opposition would be a sure way to find your head on the end of a stick." "You got that right, brother. There are certainly better places to run drugs and stay alive, that's for sure." "Did I tell you I met Jigsaw once?" "Not that I remember. Then again, I was a little out of it when I first woke up." "Well, met might not be the correct term. Almost bumped into him would be more accurate." "What happened?"
My wife and I were on summer break from the U, vacationing in Bimini, when we turned a corner in our rented Jeep and almost smashed headlong into a caravan of trucks coming the other way. They were flying down the middle of the dirt road, slinging mud into the air, each one loaded with men and guns. My wife screamed, and I reacted, swerving into a ditch. I managed to catch a glimpse of a man's face in the back seat of one of the Jeeps as they raced past us. It was Carlos Santiago. I'll never forget how his eyes burned into mine like he was marking me somehow. It can't be a good thing when a ruthless drug lord notices you. To this day, it still gives me chills when I think about it. And now, you may be an honored guest of his. Fate is a cruel mistress.
Yes, she is, he told his friend, thinking of the island he found after the swim from his one-man sub. I hear he's worth billions.
Several $100 billion, if you believe the reports out of the DEA. And in Miami, they're all over the news.
And yet, he still likes to get out with his men and get his hands dirty.
You know what they say. If you want something done right,
do it yourself.
Then it's possible he may want to make an appearance here, planning to look you in the eyes like he did me from that Jeep. One wrong word, though, and it's lights out.
Hansen gulped, deciding on what to say next. He didn't want Crosby to detect his fear. Let him come. I relish the opportunity.
Then we better get busy practicing more phrases in Spanish.
Chapter 30. Wyatt Wicke and 6 of his men were busy in Jericho's barn number 3, unpacking and inspecting the sweeping new inventory delivered in the unexpected UPS shipment. The Brownies were kind enough to back their vans up to the barn one by one, allowing his men to unload the stockpile of new weapons and gear. He was starting to wonder if he'd need to raise another building to properly store the endless surprises they were finding in the containers. Each item they pulled out looked to be brand new and made by one of the top manufacturers in the weapons trade. Barrett, Colt, Ruger, Glock, Browning, and several names from across the Atlantic. His Jericho compound was twice the size of his sister's, but unlike Pandora, all of his buildings were above ground and easy to breach. It would have taken triple the cash and several more years to complete a network of underground structures like Tally had, but he wished he had. A few weapon caches would have been a nice asset to have right about now, secure, airtight, and weatherproof. Wyatt's heart nearly leapt out of his chest when he opened a crate labeled Barrett. Inside, he found a pristine .338 bolt-action Lapua Magnum MRAD, the king of the sniper rifles as far as he was concerned. Plus, it had been outfitted with top-of-the-line optics and a 26-inch barrel.
"Fuck me! A .338!"
he said, yanking the beast out and holding it up for all to see. He felt as though he'd just found heaven, savoring every inch of the rugged, desert-camouflaged machine. He played with its adjustable folding stock and cheekpiece, nestling the precision firearm against his right shoulder and under his chin. "Oh, please tell me there's some ammo for this," he mumbled, turning his eyes to each of his men, all of whom had their heads down.
"Guys, anyone see the ammo for this bad boy?"
"Not yet," one of his men answered. It was Stan Golding, his longtime friend and world record holder for chugging beer in high school. The slender, curly-haired 20-year-old was holding up a raised fist, his smile electric.
"But wait till you see what I just found."
Wyatt put the sniper rifle down and ran to see what Golding was pulling out of another box. Stan held it up just before Wyatt arrived.
"Is that a tracking point?"
Wyatt asked him, seeing a sleek AR and a distinctive high-tech scope in his hands.
"You bet. A 7.62 by the looks of it,"
Golding said, looking at the chamber.
"That's a $15,000 rifle,"
Wyatt said, as the other 5 men came over, huddling like a pack of gawkers around a traffic accident. Golding nodded, giving the weapon to Wyatt.
"I've read about these precision-guided semis, but never seen one up close."
"The gun that aims itself," Wyatt said in awe, fiddling with the laser-guided scope. "I've seen videos on YouTube. This thing is frickin' amazing." His mind was aflutter, not believing what he was seeing. Someone had spent a fortune sending them the latest and greatest.
"Are there instructions in the box? We need to take this killing machine out to the range right now and see what it can do. If I remember right, it can auto-lock on targets running at 15 miles per hour.
Stan dug around its carton, pulling out some accessories. He held up a pair of glasses.
You might want to wear these.
Are you serious? Wyatt said, realizing Golding was holding digital eyewear. The glasses wirelessly interfaced with the rifle's optics, allowing the shooter to remotely see what the scope was tracking in real time, all without looking downrange.
You can shoot around corners with that.
Fucking awesome, Golding said, tearing into another box. Are there any more of them? Before they could continue the search, an unexpected swoosh was heard outside. Its volume and pitch increased until it raced past the barn from left to right. Then the sound dwindled quickly until an explosion was heard in the distance.
"Everyone down!"
Wyatt screamed, putting the facts together. His men hit the deck, crawling behind the nearest container.
"What the hell was that?" Golding asked. "Sounded like a rocket-propelled grenade." "RPG?"
Before Wyatt could elaborate, he heard a shortened version of the same swooshing sound. Then a powerful explosion rocked the side of the barn, sending him sideways from the shockwave. Splinters of wood blew apart as the side of the barn imploded in a cloud of dust and smoke.
"Everyone to the back!"
Wyatt yelled, shaking the cobwebs from his head. He looked at the gaping hole in the wall as he moved. The roof above it was holding steady, but he couldn't say the same for the camp's ham radio antenna. Its guy wires and extension pole were falling, smashing into the ground.
"They just took out comms,"
Wyatt told his men, finding a safer position in the rear of the barn. More explosions rocked the compound, but were farther away and to the north, in the direction of the main residence.
"Carnegie Brothers?"
Golding asked him from the right. Before Wyatt could shoot an answer back, bursts of rapid gunshots erupted. He ducked, but soon realized that none of the rounds were hitting the barn. Burst after burst was being unleashed across Jericho, but he didn't know if it was his men shooting, the group he'd left on watch, or the insurgents who'd just taken out the antenna. He waved at his men to close in on his position. They did in a flash.
"Gear up,"
he told the anxious men.
"Grab the ARs and plenty of mags. Forget the tracking point for now."
Wyatt grabbed a .308 AR-10 and 2 loaded mags sitting nearby. He jammed one of them into the rifle while searching through his memories, quickly recalling key tactical points from the endless training sessions with his grandfather, a 2-tour Vietnam veteran and legendary Marine Corps sniper.
"We should split up,"
Stan told him, loading his AR with a magazine full of rounds. The other men did the same. Wyatt agreed.
"Stan, you take Weeks and Larson and circle around west. I've got Tubbs and Sandoval, and we'll cover east. I'll work my way up top and see if I can take some of these fuckers out."
What about me?
Ray Austin asked, the lone greenhorn in the group. Wyatt grabbed the former college sprinter turned prepper by the collar.
"I have a very important mission for you."
Whatever you need me to do. I won't let you down, Wyatt,
the 24-year-old said in a deep, gravelly voice. Wyatt took the semi-auto rifle from the rookie and gave him a .45 pistol instead, then handed Austin a set of keys, plus 5 empty magazines and a box of 50 shells.
"As soon as we clear the back, I want you to go to the motor pool and take my truck east. Stay off the main roads and go find my sister. Don't stop for anything. You hear me? Nothing."
Austin nodded, but his eyes weren't sure.
What about the fence?
"Don't stop for anything, not even the fence. There's a map with coordinates in the glove box and a stash of weapons and ammo behind the seat. Tell her what's happening here and make sure she's on full alert. If I'm right, and this is the Carnegie Brothers, they might decide to head to Pandora for some long overdue payback. But most of all, tell her to stay put until I come find her."
Austin's eyes pinched, giving a look of confusion.
If the Carnegie Brothers are heading her way, shouldn't she bug out?
"No, they'd find her. She needs to use her secure underground bunker. Tell her to dig in with the guns you're bringing and wait for me. Got it?"
The man nodded and seemed content with the mission, which surprised Wyatt. Austin was eager to learn and eager to fight, always asking questions and never satisfied with all that he'd accomplished thus far. He'd only joined the group a few weeks prior and hadn't had the chance to complete all of their tactical training sessions. Plus, his long-range accuracy needed work, so Wyatt didn't want him involved in the skirmish outside. He'd be cannon fodder. Austin stood back and waited for the rest of the team to load up and head for the rear exit. Then he followed behind, exactly as Wyatt wanted him to.
"This is it, boys. Keep your heads down and remember your training, and don't forget to breathe. Short, controlled bursts, and watch your flanks.
Wyatt told everyone in a command whisper as they stood inside the rear exit.
"If it moves, shoot it. Don't think twice,"
Golding added.
"Time to get some."
Chapter 31. Former sprinter Raymond Austin kept his head down while the thundering echoes of gunfire rang out behind him as he ran into the barn where Jericho's vehicles were parked. The rest of the camp was engaged in a firefight with an unknown amount of insurgents, while his mission was to slip away and take Wyatt's truck to Pandora. Wyatt told him not to stop for anything, and that's exactly what he planned to do, as soon as he figured out which vintage Chevy truck in the motor pool was Wyatt's. The fleet of trucks all looked the same to him, and truth be told, he'd never paid attention when they were in use. He thought they were common property and not assigned to specific drivers. He set the .45 and ammo aside, then took Wyatt's keys in his trembling hands and tried sticking the largest one into the door lock of the first vehicle. The key went in, telling him it was a truck key, but it wouldn't turn. He wished these trucks were much newer models with remote keyless entry. Then he could press a button and the chirp would tell him which one was Wyatt's. It took 3 more attempts, but he finally found Wyatt's truck. The paint was peeling across the hood where the red stripes met the white, and passenger seat opposite him was torn down the middle, but the rest looked to be in good shape. He climbed in and opened the glove box, finding the map Wyatt had told him about. He unfolded it and found a circled dot with a notation written below it in red ink. Pandora.
Hey, it's Simon.
He traced the route back to Jericho,
When it's
memorizing the
howitzer versus
locations
human,
of the
it's never a good
waypoints
thing
for the
for those
various
made of
trails
only
and
flesh
dirt
and bone.
roads connecting the
I'm
2
not sure if
locations.
Wyatt's going to make it out from being
Austin
buried
hopped
alive
out of the
in that
truck,
house.
grabbed the stuff
The only way
Wyatt
to
had
know
given
for
him,
sure
and
is
tossed
to
it onto the
continue on
passenger
with the
seat.
next installment of this
The
saga.
seat release lever was
Before
down
you
by his
do,
right
don't
knee.
forget to like
He
this
pulled it
video
up,
and subscribe
sending
to
the
this
bench
channel.
seat forward.
We'd appreciate it.
Sure enough, there was
Thank
a
you for your
stash of 3
continued
stainless
support.
steel
Take care, my
handguns,
friends.
plus a dozen
I'll see
boxes
you in
of
book 2.
9mm Hornady critical defense ammo, hollow points. He put the seat back, then hopped into the driver's seat and put the key into the ignition. The engine fired up on the first try. A second later, the column shifter was in reverse, allowing him to back up until the hood was angled at the back door of the barn. Wyatt told him to stop for nothing, so he put the transmission into drive and jammed on the gas, sending the historic beast racing for the huge sliding door. The front bumper and grille tore through the gray-colored wood, breaking him free. The eastern fence was only 100 yards away, but the terrain was uneven along the way, sending him bouncing up and down inside the cab as the truck did its best imitation of an out-of-control slalom racer at the Olympics. When the fence arrived, he noticed a pile of rocks just beyond its perimeter. His hands gripped the steering wheel and turned it to the right. The truck swerved and smashed through the chain-link fence and barely missed the pile of rocks on the other side. The middle section of the fence and its razor wire was now laying on top of the cab and hanging down along the sides, dragging in the dirt. He was scraping metal across the property, making a horrendous clanking and clinking noise in the process. He thought about getting out and manually removing the fencing, but Wyatt said to stop for nothing, so he ignored the obstruction and kept driving. The first dirt road was about 1,000 yards away. Then he'd turn right and drive about 10 miles before he'd make the second turn. Austin prayed something along the ground would grab the fencing and rip it from the vehicle. Otherwise, it would be a noisy, slow trip the rest of the way. Wyatt worked his way around the back of the main house with his squad mates Tubbs and Sandoval tight on his 6. Each man was armed with an assault rifle and a holstered sidearm, but carried a limited amount of ammo. There wasn't time to gear up with everything they needed, so they'd quickly snatched what they could before cutting across the back of the compound, making it to the rear of the house. Gunfire was still echoing across the landscape, but it seemed to be less intense than before. Wyatt wasn't sure why, and truth be told, it didn't matter. He needed to get himself and his team into position.
Tubbs, you've got point. Work your way around the kitchen and provide support for the other teams. Sandoval, you cover him. I need to get you guys to work your way into position like we trained. Remember to slice the pie. Search, identify, clear. There's only 2 of you, so it changes your points of domination. You need to adjust and work together.
Both men nodded, their chests heaving and eyes filled with a mix of fear and excitement. He knew he had their attention, but their unchecked adrenaline was fighting for control. On contact, maintain interlocking fields of fire and don't hesitate, Wyatt said, making eye contact with each man. Remember, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Now go! Wyatt waited until they made it around the corner. Then it was time for him to move. His destination? The single-person observation deck on the 3rd floor. It was stationed adjacent to the front attic space, near the highest peak of the home. It offered a wide-angle view of the front of the property, the perfect spot for a determined sniper. There were 2 ways to get to the observation deck, from the front of the home using an extension ladder, or through the inside using a secret passage he and his men had constructed. Since the front of the house was taking fire, he'd never get a ladder in place and make the climb without being killed. That left only one choice, the secret passage. He entered the back door with his rifle in a firing position, knowing he couldn't assume the home was free of threats. He'd have to search and clear each area as he went, moving quickly but safely. The kitchen was first. He crept along the cabinets on the right, then went past the center island and around it until he was at the sink next to the fridge, each time swinging his weapon in the same direction as his eyes. He didn't find any contacts. Up next was the main hallway on the 1st floor. It ran the full width of the house and split the floor plan in half. To the left was the master bedroom, and to the right were stairs leading to the 2nd floor. He went right, keeping low while he entered, searched, and cleared both of the 1st floor bedrooms along his path. Again, no threats identified. So he pressed on, checking his 6 every few seconds in case someone was closing in on him from behind. He made his way to the staircase and worked his way up to the 1st landing, keeping the barrel of his AR active and engaged. He swept the landing, then swung his feet around and completed the climb to the 2nd floor. Again, no tangos. There was a closed door on his right. Wyatt grabbed its knob, turned it, and swung it open. Just then, a phrase entered his mind. The fatal funnel. A term his grandfather had used almost daily during their long training sessions. He remembered the words well. Every doorway is a fatal convergence point, his grandfather would preach, where most of a threat's firepower will be directed. He stepped back to keep a safe distance from the threshold as his training took over. He turned his feet and hips to slim his profile, then sidestepped slowly to work through the field of view a few degrees at a time. Inch by inch he went, staying in the hallway as he slid over to expose and search more and more of the center-fed room. It only took about 30 seconds to complete the 180-degree tactical maneuver known as slicing the pie. No furniture and no targets were inside the empty bedroom, so he went through the doorway and stepped to the right, heading along the path of least resistance to establish his primary point of domination, just like he'd been trained. Wyatt kept his weapon high, working his way along the bedroom wall until he came to the sliding closet door. He opened and cleared the closet, then grabbed the hangers and pushed a smattering of old flannel clothes and coveralls out of the way. He pressed his hand along the back wall, releasing a hidden, spring-loaded door from the magnets holding it closed. The door popped open, and he stepped through, crouching low to squeeze through the opening and enter the hidden compartment. He turned and repositioned the clothes on their hangers in the closet, then pulled the hatch closed for concealment. Wyatt could still hear the occasional burst of gunfire, but it wasn't nearly as intense as before. He turned sideways in the passageway built into the wall, then inched along in the direction of a walled-off 10 by 10-foot storage space known by his men as Rally Point G. Others would have called it Grandma's Attic, since that's technically what it was, but he needed to give it a more tactical-sounding name, something outsiders wouldn't understand in case they overheard a conversation or picked up some crosstalk. A year earlier, he and his men had covered up access to the attic space by constructing fake walls to create the hidden area. They needed a secure location within the residence that could be used as both a secret weapons cache and as a designated fallback point in case the home was breached. They could have made the corridor inside the wall wider, but chose not to since it would have taken too much depth away from the bedroom. Someone might have noticed the room was much too shallow in relation to its exterior walls and would have started investigating. In the end, they'd decided that concealment was more important than ease of movement. He made it to the attic space, passing through the split in the wall that had been left open for access. Half the room was filled with supplies, such as candles, matches, water, and cans of food. Plus, there was a stockpile of ammo and guns in the corner. His hands were already full, so he skipped the ammo pile for now and went to the only window in the room, a flip-style circular attic window. Its diameter was just large enough for a slender person like him to slip through it when it was swung open at the midpoint, and that's what he planned to do. A few seconds later, the glass pane was open, and he was climbing through it with the help of a wooden chair and his extra-long legs. When his feet landed on the single-person observation deck, he dropped to his belly and crawled to the left, keeping low until he had eyes on the front gate and the area beyond. Chapter 32. Wyatt wasn't hearing gunfire at the moment and wondered what was happening. He used the Vortex 3x9 optics on his AR-10 to glass the area in front of the house, needing to identify targets and assess the situation. He counted 11 heavy-duty trucks, all of them with chrome push bars across the front grills. They were dual-axle, crew-cab Ford F-350s, and each looked to be sitting without a driver, even though their tailpipes were puffing smoke. Their color used to be white, but with the menacing weather, the white was now mostly a pink smear. They'd been positioned in a semicircle about 30 yards beyond the front gate, each parked at an angle perpendicular to the front of the property. Some of the trucks had bullet holes in their side panels and doors, indicating Wyatt's men had sent rounds their way. Yet, at the moment, Jericho's men weren't firing, but neither were the men beyond the gate. Wyatt could see the tops of at least 24 clean-shaven heads, each keeping low behind the uninvited trucks and dripping with red rain. He didn't know who these bald men were, but they weren't the long-haired hillbillies known as the Carnegie Brothers. Out to the right, he saw 3 empty RPG launch rigs lying in the red mud blanketing the area. He knew about 2 of the rocket-propelled grenades. Both had been fired at Jericho's ham radio tower earlier, while he and his men were inside the barn checking the contents of the UPS delivery. He wondered where the other RPG had been sent. His optics blurred into a runny red glob, making him take his eyes away to wipe off the lens on the far end. He looked through the scope. The view was clear again. He swung it around and surveyed the property to the left, but didn't see any signs of damage. He turned the scope out to the right, searching the far property line. His vision found the stand of telephone poles that had been installed by the phone company back in the 1940s. However, 5 of them were no longer standing erect. The pole in the middle had been severed into 2 pieces, leaving a stump rising up from the ground, and the upper section was lying flat on the ground. The other 4 poles were intact, but leaning over, one almost touching the ground. Some of their wires were dangling free, obviously pulled loose from the adjacent poles when the middle one was taken out by the RPG. The facts lined up in his brain. The men outside the gate had taken out communications first, which is what he would have done too. First, the ham radio antenna, then the landlines. Tactically, it was an important first step and usually done prior to an incursion. It would help keep the persons holed up inside from calling for reinforcements or law enforcement. That was true, unless, of course, those inside carried handhelds. However, the range of a portable was limited, and since they were dozens of miles from the nearest city, their usefulness was minimal. That's one of the reasons Wyatt and his men chose the ham radio setup for communications. Well, that and the fact that none of them wanted to carry cell phones due to GPS tracking by the government and its spies. The use of a landline was out of the question too, since all of the country's copper lines were now under NSA jurisdiction and too easy to monitor, shut down, and control at a moment's notice. He didn't understand why the insurgents were holding position and not attacking. They clearly had overwhelming numbers and should have been flanking out in preparation for a multi-vectored attack, but they weren't. It was as if they were waiting for something, or someone, or perhaps they didn't know what they were doing. It was possible they rolled up on the scene expecting to overrun Jericho easily with a few RPGs and some firepower, but when his men pushed back, they held to reassess. He trained the scope's reticle on one of the bald men who was now moving behind the trucks. Wyatt kept his finger extended near the trigger, but not on it as he tracked the man moving from vehicle to vehicle, stopping for about 20 seconds before advancing. Wyatt thought he may have been the man in charge, working his way through the rest of the hairless, delivering orders. Had the firefight been active, he would have taken a shot by now. However, since the situation was relatively calm, he decided to wait and gather more intel before engaging. He knew he'd only get off 1 or 2 shots before they zeroed in on his position and returned fire, so he needed to choose his first target wisely. Twice, during the leader's movements, Wyatt caught a glimpse of the man's clothing and weapon. Jeans, white dress shirt covered in runny streaks of red from the rain, and an assault rifle with optics. The weapon was nothing out of the ordinary, though given the civilian trucks and the casual dress code, he figured these men were amateurs and not trained operators. If his assumption was true, then he expected to eventually see a few shotguns and hunting rifles in the mix too. His conclusions seemed to make sense, and they did explain the current lack of aggression. The men outside may have received their own unexpected UPS shipment of guns, ammo, and RPGs, then decided to take to the streets for whatever reason. But why attack Jericho? There had to be easier targets along the way. Did they have a specific purpose in mind, or was this some type of end-of-the-world assault ride? Before he could answer his own question, a blur of movement caught his eye from beyond the fleet of trucks. About a mile down the road, another convoy was approaching. Only the vehicles coming his way were not white Ford trucks, nor did they look military. They were flatbed trucks, 6 to be exact, with what appeared to be tarp-covered cargo. After they closed the distance, the lead truck broke away from the pack and pulled in behind the men who were dug in out front. The other flatbed stopped short about 500 yards away, while the closest vehicle circled around, then backed up, aiming its rear bumper at the front gate. Its tarp was a pale gray color with red splotches from the falling rain. Something tall with an irregular shape was hiding underneath, but Wyatt didn't recognize it. There was one high point toward the rear and another in the middle. The men behind the F-350s spread apart in the middle, huddling to either side of the flatbed and its cargo. Then, they raised their weapons in unison and began to unleash a hail of lead at Jericho. The silent countryside came to life when the thundering barrage of supersonic rounds crossed the distance between the trucks and the farmhouse in milliseconds. Wyatt ducked for cover, hoping his men below did the same. A few seconds later, the gunfire intensified, sounding as though his men were returning fire. Metal clanked, wood splintered, and glass broke, but not anywhere around him. He realized nobody was shooting at him, so he brought his head up, planning to bring his rifle to bear. Before he could select a target, he saw the driver of the flatbed open his door and swing his feet and body around the back of the cab. Then he slipped in behind the cargo and bent over at the waist, just before he moved to his left and disappeared from view. A few seconds later, the straps holding the cargo in place snapped loose and the cover was pulled off toward the cab in one quick motion. Wyatt's jaw dropped when he realized what the driver had just unveiled. Jericho's men must have seen it too, because their return fire stopped in an instant. Their compound was now facing a mobile artillery howitzer, painted camo green and sitting on a pair of flat tires. Its long barrel had a wide bore and was aimed in the direction of the main house. Wyatt recognized it from his grandfather's teachings. A 105mm howitzer, model M2A1, a high-explosive mobile weapon with a distinctive recoil mechanism mounted above its cannon barrel. The men behind the white trucks continued shooting, probably to provide cover fire for the driver. There was a flurry of arm movement behind the mammoth gun, then its barrel began to move in a slow, methodical manner, inching its way down and into a firing position. Wyatt brought his rifle up to take out the driver before he could finish adjusting the trajectory.
but he couldn't get a clean shot at his head or chest. The operator area at the rear of the howitzer was protected by a metal shield. All he could see was the lower part of one leg. It would have to do. He moved the crosshairs of the vortex scope down to the man's left knee, let out a slow exhale to steady his hands, then squeezed the trigger gently until the sear engaged. The AR recoiled as it sent a single round downrange with supersonic intent. It hit the man's leg precisely where he'd aimed, ripping his kneecap apart. Blood and tissue flew from the man's body, sending the driver onto the bed of the truck. He landed on his belly, then began to crawl closer to the howitzer. Wyatt assumed the driver was working his way behind better cover, which meant he only had seconds to adjust his aim and fire again. He brought the scope down, lining up a precision headshot. However, before his finger could pull the trigger, the men behind the white trucks turned their attention to Wyatt's location on the roof. They unleashed holy hell, sending hundreds of rounds his way. He let go of his rifle and ducked when the first of the rounds ripped up the roofing shingles around his position. He could hear the wall next to him tear apart as the firestorm obliterated everything in his vicinity. He pressed his chest and legs hard against the observation deck, hoping to give them nothing to shoot at as he inched his way in retreat. The onslaught continued until he heard a powerful, deafening boom. At that moment, two things happened simultaneously. He realized the driver fired the M2A1 cannon, and the roofing deck below him gave way. Wyatt's body dropped through the air and landed with a sudden thud on the second floor of the house, knocking the wind out of him. His face was buried in a pile of debris as his lungs gasped for air, feeling as though his chest had been flattened by a runaway train. He took a few seconds to evaluate his condition while the rapid intake of air continued. Other than being stunned from the impact, he felt okay. The crushing pain across his chest was easing with each new breath. However, his ears were ringing from the blast, making it difficult to think straight. He rolled over, pushing pieces of wood and roofing material from his body. He stood up, out of instinct, planning to turn and run for the door, but then another artillery shell made impact. This time, the lower part of the wall in front of him exploded, sending a shockwave of pressure, splinters, and 2x4s his way. Something smacked him hard in the gut and sent him flying to the rear. It felt as though he was airborne for hours, waiting for his body to hit something. It finally did, catching the floor with the back of his heels. Inertia sent him toppling backwards, flipping over and over until he eventually came to rest on his belly near the wooden post at the top of the stairs. He coughed and winced, needing a few seconds to focus his thoughts again. Then he heard it. A series of loud creaks and pops, the sound of wood breaking.
"Shit!"
he said, right before the landing gave way, sending him further into the depths of the house. He let out a sharp grunt when his back smacked into something hard on the way down. When he finally hit bottom, he came to rest on his right side, with his arm trapped beneath his body. Wyatt opened his eyes to find his vision filled with blurry flecks and blobs. His head was pounding, and there was considerable amount of weight pressing on his knees. He craned his neck to take a peek at his legs, but then a wicked spin of dizziness came, turning everything black. To be continued. In Lethal Rain, Book 2.
Hey, it's Simon. All I can say is, wow. When it's howitzer versus human, it's never a good thing for those made of only flesh and bone. I'm not sure if Wyatt's going to make it out from being buried alive in that house. The only way to know for sure is to continue on with the next installment of this saga. Before you do, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. We'd appreciate it. Thank you for your continued support. Take care, my friends. I'll see you in Book 2.